The roses were the first to go. Princess Ilyra Marivelle watched from the balcony as the palace gardeners moved down the terraces, shears useless at their sides. The roses, once proud pillars of crimson and gold, sagged under a gray film that clung to every petal. When the wind brushed them, they did not sway. They crumbled, scattering ash instead of fragrance. Below, the gardeners crossed themselves and whispered prayers to the old spirits, careful not to inhale too deeply. It spread further overnight, came a quiet voice at her elbow. 4 more beds at least. Ilyra did not startle. Marquand Elevar had a talent for arriving soundlessly, like a page turning at exactly the right moment. 4 beds here, she said, fingers curling around the carved stone rail, and 3 vineyards in the eastward fields, according to this morning's report. The blight isn't slowing. Marquand's jaw tightened. It isn't natural. I've told the council as much. You told the council it might be connected to dreams. A small, wry smile tugged at Ilyra's mouth. They did not take that well. In my defense, corrupted somnoric resonance is more accurate than the courtier's favorite word. He made a face. Curse solves nothing. Sometimes I think they like curses, Ilyra said. Her gaze swept the terraces, then the mist-laden horizon, where neat rows of farmland disappeared into haze. Marquand snorted softly. Careful, Your Highness. If anyone overhears you, they'll claim the blight is offended by your lack of faith. They'll blame me anyway, she said, too lightly. I might as well earn it. The ache beneath the joke was real. She was the second princess of the verdant court, the one not promised to any neighboring kingdom, not heir to the throne. Ilyra's duty, everyone said, was to make herself useful in other ways. Diplomatic errands, quiet negotiations, smiling through banquets until her cheeks numbed. And now, perhaps, to be a convenient vessel for blame. Her mother had not said so directly. Queen Lumerus rarely needed to. Marquand's gaze softened as he followed her eyes across the terraces. They're afraid, he murmured. Afraid fields will turn to dust. Afraid the wells will run dry. You can't fault them for raiding the storyteller's stockpiles of curses and omens. I do not fault them for fear, Ilyra replied. I fault them for refusing to listen when you bring them possibilities that don't fit neatly into their scrolls. He huffed, something like gratitude in the sound, and pushed his spectacles higher up his nose. Speaking of scrolls, I found something last night. Her head turned. In the East Tower again? Marquand gave her a guilty smile. You weren't in the library to drag me out at a reasonable hour, so yes. The archivists did warn me that the Somnoran stacks are more dust than ink, but buried in the oldest cases, there was a fragment I hadn't seen before. Somnoran, she repeated, interest sparking. I thought most of those records were lost. Most were, he agreed, burned, sealed, or simply unraveled. But this was written on pressed moonleaf, not parchment, stronger. I nearly sneezed my head off brushing it clean, but once I did, his eyes brightened in that way that meant he was about to forget to breathe. It mentions a Garden of Somnora and a prince whose sleep holds back a tide of nightmares. Ilyra arched a brow. A fairy tale, then? That's what I thought at first. But it also notes somnoric currents, actual structured magic, not just metaphor. It calls him the Dream Gate's warden. Somnora fell centuries ago, Ilyra said softly. Our tutors mentioned dream magic in passing as something from a more fanciful age, like sky cities and rivers that float upward. Dream magic was real, Marquand said. Somnoric arts formed the foundation of our earliest treaties. Something twisted, though. Somnora collapsed, and everything to do with dreams was labeled dangerous and buried. But if this fragment is right, there was a prince bound in sleep to keep the balance between waking and dreaming realms. If he failed, the boundary would thin. Ilyra arched a brow. A fairy tale, then? That's what I thought at first. But it also notes somnoric currents, actual structured magic, not just metaphor. It calls him the Dream Gate's warden. Somnora fell centuries ago, Ilyra said softly. Our tutors mentioned dream magic in passing as something from a more fanciful age, like sky cities and rivers that flowed upward. Dream magic was real, Marcon said. Somnoric arts formed the foundation of our earliest treaties. Something twisted, though. Somnora collapsed, and everything to do with dreams was labeled dangerous and buried. But if this fragment is right, there was a prince bound in sleep to keep the balance between waking and dreaming realms. If he failed, the boundary would thin. Ilyra looked again at the gray film on the distant vineyards, the way light seemed to bend oddly above them. How lately sleep did not soothe, but left her more tired, faint impressions of faceless shadows clinging to the edges of her mind. "You think the blight and the nightmares are connected," she murmured, "and that this sleeping prince, this warden, might be why." "I think," Marcon said carefully, "that something which guarded the border between dreams and the world has weakened, and if that scroll mentions a garden and a slumbering guardian, we might be very foolish to ignore it. Have you told my mother? I have an audience after noon court." His tongue pressed briefly against his cheek, a habit when he was nervous. "She listens more than the ministers do. Still, I suspect she'll want additional evidence before she sends anyone chasing legends outside our borders." Ilyra's fingers tightened on the rail. A thought moved through her like the first hint of rain in dry air, unwelcome, yet inevitable. "Where is this garden mentioned to be?" she asked. Marcon hesitated. The fragment was damaged, but the remaining lines talk of the crown that took root and the last petals resting where Somnora kissed the verdant hills. I think it lies at the far edge of our territory, near the old border stones, beyond the eastern orchards, where no one tends the land anymore. "Unclaimed ground," Ilyra murmured. "Perfect place for dreams to go feral." "Ilyra," Marcon's brows creased. "I know that tone. Do not volunteer yourself to go traipsing through cursed gardens." "Someone will have to," she said. "If Mother believes you at all, she'll send riders or a battalion. Soldiers will trample any subtle residue magic might have left. And if she doesn't believe you—" Ilyra straightened, drew in a breath that tasted of wilted petals and hidden rot. "Then it is convenient that I have not yet been given a diplomatic posting, or a marriage contract. My schedule is shockingly free." He stared at her. "You're the king's daughter, which means I am required to be useful when the kingdom is in danger." She met his gaze steadily. "Besides, if there is any truth to your fragment, it originated with Somnora. Somnora practiced the Somnoric arts. They dealt in dreams, and my tutors may have avoided that subject, but they did not avoid teaching me how to sense currents in the air." Marcon's eyes widened. "You've felt something?" "Not clearly. Threads. A heaviness in the air at night, like mist pressing behind glass." She eyed the ashen roses. "If this is only a blight, it is too clever by half. It creeps where sleep is deepest, in fields, vineyards, places tended at dawn and dusk." "Dreamt of places," he murmured. "Yes." Ilyra managed a faint smile. "Tell my mother about your fragment. I will be present for the council session. And if she forbids you, then I will obey," Ilyra said, because it was the only answer she could give, and because obedience and intention were, in practice, sometimes different things. He sighed, knowing her well enough to hear the distinction. "I should never have taught you how to read footnotes. They are where you hide your most interesting heresies," she replied. Despite their grim topic, Marcon huffed a laugh. "Promise me you will not go alone." "I promise to try," she said. He groaned quietly. "That is not how promises work, Ilyra." But his eyes, earnest and worried behind his spectacles, told her he would do everything in his power to make sure she did not have to. The council chamber smelled of old wood polish, ink, and tension. Ilyra stood slightly behind and to the left of Queen Lumeris as ministers argued around the long oak table. Maps lay open before them, ink dotted with black smudges marking the spread of the blight. Tiny wooden tokens, representing villages, wells, way stations, had been pushed aside to make room for the stain markers. "It advances along no sensible path," one minister protested, pointing with a quivering finger. "Here one vineyard, but the next untouched. This orchard blighted, but its neighbor spared. It is not wind-borne, your majesty." "It is deliberate," another declared. "The work of an enemy kingdom. They have sent poison into our soil." "To what end?" snapped the first. "Their own borders would suffer the same fate, and we have reports that their fields remain green." "If not poison," a third interjected, "then perhaps the old tales are right. The earth is displeased. We have dug too deep, planted too much, pulled too much from—" "Enough." The single word from Queen Lumeris silenced the room. She rarely raised her voice. She did not need to. Authority clung to her like a mantle, cool and heavy, woven from years of difficult choices. She stood at the head of the table, dark hair coiled in intricate loops, crown gleaming dully in the filtered light. Her gaze swept the maps, the stain markers, the faces of her counselors. Then she turned to Marquand, who stood at the opposite end, a rolled scroll in his hand, ink stains on his fingers. "You have asked to speak, Master Elevar," Lumeris said. "Do so." Marquand cleared his throat. "Yes, your majesty. I believe the timing of this blight aligns with disruptions in Somnoric currents." A murmur passed around the table, part skepticism, part unease. "Somnoric," repeated one minister. "The dream arts, those are dead and buried." "Not entirely," Marquand said. "The verdant court still uses low-level Somnoric infusions for medicinal drafts, for harvest timing, for—" "Magic is not the same as superstition," another snapped. Ilyra watched Marquand straighten. He might be soft-spoken and bookish, but confidence lit his face when he spoke of his work. "Magic responds to patterns," he said. "This does too. It favors places where human thought lingers in repeated rhythm, fields tilled with the same motions, vines tended with the same songs, places that are, in a sense, half in our world and half in memory, dream-touched. I have also collected accounts of increasingly troubled sleep among farmers, shepherds, even guards on the night watch, nightmares, restlessness. It suggests something is stirring along the boundary between waking and dream." "You are saying this is a dream sickness?" Lumeris's tone remained level, but Ilyra knew her mother well enough to hear genuine curiosity beneath it. "I am saying," Marquand replied, "that I found a fragment that may be relevant." He unrolled the moonleaf sheet with great care, placing it on the table. The ministers leaned in, despite themselves, peering at the silver-blue fibers. "This is Somnoran script," Lumeris observed. "Old, few can read it." "Fortunately, your majesty, I am insufferable when it comes to unreadable things." Marquand offered a quick, awkward half-bow, then pointed to elegant lines of faded ink. "This passage speaks of a Garden of Somnora, at the edge of what used to be their realm. It describes a prince, Caelan, bound to a blossom at the garden's heart, his sleep maintaining the balance between human dreams and the void beyond. It also warns that if shadows learn to eat what mortals dream, they will creep into the waking world." "Shadows that eat dreams," one minister scoffed. "We are not children to be frightened by bedtime tales." "Perhaps you should be," Marquand said quietly. "Because if something has begun feeding on our dreams, it might leave residue where our thoughts are richest, our fields, our gardens, our wells." He gestured to the black smudges on the maps. "The pattern fits." "And your solution?" Lumeris asked. "Wake this prince who has supposedly slumbered for centuries?" Marquand hesitated only a heartbeat. "If the garden exists, and if the binding does as well, then yes. At least we should find it. Assess whether any lingering magic might be strengthening whatever feeds on us. Perhaps we can reawaken whatever defenses Somnora once had. Silence settled. Ministers exchanged skeptical looks. Some shook their heads outright. "Even if such a garden exists," one said, "we do not know where. We cannot spare scouts when we need every hand to ward our fields." "It lies along our eastern hills," Ilyra said suddenly. Every head turned. Her mother's gaze settled on her, sharp as a drawn blade. "Ilyra," Lumeris said, "explain." She stepped forward, heart beating fast, but her voice steadied as she spoke. "The fragment mentions where Somnora kissed the verdant hills. The old border stones stand beyond our eastern orchards, half buried. I remember them from a journey with Father years ago. No one farms beyond them. The land grows wild there. If Somnora's last roots reached into our hills, that is where they would be." One minister frowned. "Even if you're right, it is not safe terrain for a scouting party." "It may be less safe to ignore it," Ilyra replied. "If the balance between waking and dream is truly failing, every day we hesitate gives this blight more time to spread." Lumeris's gaze remained unreadable. "You propose, then, that we send a group to locate this garden?" "Yes, Mother." "Who?" "The fewer feet we trample over potential Somnoric traces, the better," Ilyra said. "A small party. Myself, Marquand, and a handful of guards. We know the old paths. We can read magical signatures. We will be cautious." There it was, the words spoken aloud. Her chest felt oddly light. A minister sputtered, "Your Majesty, you cannot allow the princess to—" "I can," Lumeris said coolly, "and I will decide whether I should." She studied Ilyra for a long, slow moment. Her mother's eyes, the same dark green as Ilyra's, held calculation and something else, a flicker of pride, perhaps, or worry so deep it had hardened into steel. "You understand," Lumeris said at last, "that this may be nothing, an old story clung to by a scholar who reads too much." "I do," Ilyra said. "You understand that if there is something there, if this garden and its prince exist, it may not welcome us. Old magic rarely appreciates being prodded." "I do." "And you still offer yourself?" Ilyra swallowed the urge to say it was easier than sitting still while their world rotted. Instead, she inclined her head. "Yes, Mother." A subtle sigh escaped the queen, so quiet most would miss it. "Very well. You will depart at dawn tomorrow, with a contingent of 6 guards and Master Elevar. You will go, you will look, and if you find anything resembling danger, you will return. You will not play hero in a story no one remembers correctly." Relief and fear tangled in Ilyra's lungs. She bowed. "As you command." Lumeris's gaze softened, just a fraction. "You are my daughter," she added. "Do not forget that when you weigh risk against duty." "I won't," Ilyra whispered. But in the hollow behind her ribs, she already knew the scales would always tip the same way. The eastern hills smelled of time and old rain. Dawn painted them in muted gold as Ilyra's party rode along the narrow path that snaked between rock outcroppings and low, scrubby trees. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their calls cautious, as if even they sensed the wrongness lurking beneath the beauty. Marquand rode at her side, his horse picking its way with careful steps. One hand clutched the reins, the other a leather satchel of notes, talismans, and a delicate Somnoric compass, whose needle quivered erratically. "It's worse out here," he murmured. Ilyra nodded. She felt it too. At the palace, the blight was visible on petals and vines. Here, its presence hummed like a discordant chord beneath everything. Colors seemed slightly dulled. Shadows clung longer than they should. She had slept poorly the night before, stirring from dreams full of muffled voices and petals falling upward like ash. 6 guards rode behind them, cloaks cinched, hands resting on sword hilts. Captain Theron, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, had made his opinion of this journey known in tight-lipped silence. "We're close," Marcan said, holding up the compass. The needle had steadied, pointing toward a gap between 2 stones on the ridge. They were taller than a man, worn smooth by time, their surfaces etched with faint lines that shimmered when the light struck at an angle. "The border markers," Ilyra murmured, "just as I remembered." The stones reminded her of that childhood visit, her father's laughing voice, his hand warm around hers as he pointed out the old boundary between realms. "Here," he'd said, "is where Somnora's reach once ended and ours began." She'd asked what Somnora had been like. He'd said, "A country of dreamers who flew too high until their wings burned away." Now, one stone bore a thin web of gray across its lower half, as if something had tried to climb it and died in the attempt. Captain Theron edged his horse closer. "Princess, should we proceed on foot from here?" She studied the terrain beyond the stones. The land dipped into a shallow valley, choked with tall grasses and wildflowers, many already touched by the same ashen pall as the palace roses. Beyond that, a darker smudge of vegetation marked what could be a copse of trees or something else entirely. "Yes," she said, "we'll go quietly. There's no sense announcing ourselves if we don't know what listens." They dismounted. The air cooled as soon as they stepped past the stones, as if the world beyond had only reluctantly allowed dawn through. Marcan's compass needle spun in a tight circle, then steadied again, pointing down the valley. "You feel that?" he whispered. Ilyra did. Not wind, not cold, but a pressure along the back of her neck, like a gaze without eyes. It wasn't wholly hostile, more expectant, waiting. They moved slowly. The guards fanned out in a defensive arc, boots whispering through the grass. Seeds brushed Ilyra's fingertips, tiny and brittle, disintegrating at her touch. Then, as they crested a small rise, the valley opened. "By all the old names," Marquand breathed. The garden lay below them, ringed by twisted trees whose branches held both blossoms and bare bones of limbs, as if caught midway between seasons. Vines cascaded from stone ledges in silver and pale lavender, their petals giving off a dim internal glow. Pools of water reflected not the cloud-mottled sky, but night, stars glimmering in depths that should have shown her own astonished face. At the very center of it all was a single massive flower. Its stem rose thicker than any tree trunk, pale as moonlight. The petals unfurled in layers upon layers, each the size of a cloak, luminous and faintly translucent. Delicate veins pulsed with light like slow heartbeats. The bloom faced upward, cradling something at its heart, a shape just visible between curled petals. "Stay alert," Captain Theron said. "This place is wrong." "Not wrong," Marquand said softly. "Old. Angry, perhaps, but not simply malicious." Ilyra couldn't answer. Her breath had gone shallow. Something in the garden called to her, no, recognized her. She walked as if drawn by a thread, down the last slope, through air that tasted faintly of honey and iron. When she stepped between the outer ring of flowers, their petals turned toward her as if tracking her movement. Some were lush and whole, others bore the gray film of the blight, edges curling inward like burnt parchment. The garden itself was fighting. As she approached the central blossom, she saw him. He lay within the cradle of the flower, as if the bloom had grown around his body. Vines wrapped gently around his arms and torso, holding him in place without constricting. His hair, dark and tousled, fanned across the inner petals. His skin held a faint luminescent pallor, as if moonlight had seeped beneath it and refused to leave. His eyes were closed. She had never seen him before, yet he felt familiar, like a figure glimpsed 1,000 times in half-remembered dreams. His features were fine, but not delicate, The lines of his mouth relaxed, giving him a look of peaceful concentration rather than helplessness. "He hasn't aged," Marquand murmured, standing at her shoulder. "If this is truly Prince Caelan, he's been sleeping longer than any of our records." "Is he alive?" one of the guards asked. Ilyra stepped closer until her hand rested on the edge of a petal. It was cool and firm under her palm, like stone smoothed by water. When she leaned over, she could hear it, the faintest echo of a heartbeat. Not his, but the garden's. Petal, stem, vine, all pulsed with a rhythm that set her own pulse to matching. "Yes," she whispered, "he's tethered, to this place, to something deeper." A ripple passed through the garden, as if in answer. Petals on the surrounding flowers shivered. The faint glow in the central bloom brightened, washing her in silver. "Princess," Captain Theron sent sharply, "step back. I think he's aware we're here, or the garden is. We must be careful. One wrong interference could—" Ilyra did not hear the rest. The moment her fingers tightened reflexively on the petal, something seized. Not her hand, her mind. The world spun, the garden blurring into streaks of light. A rushing filled her ears, like water pouring through a narrow channel. She felt herself falling without moving, sinking through layers of air that grew denser, warmer, full of whispered syllables she couldn't quite catch. She tried to jerk back, tried to cry out, but her voice had no place to go. The garden's heartbeat swelled, louder and louder, until it was indistinguishable from her own. Then, abruptly, the falling stopped. She stood on a path of pale stone under a sky full of drifting petals. They floated like snow overhead, each petal luminous, casting soft reflections on the pathway. The air smelled of jasmine and something else, a scent like freshly opened letters. The distant murmur of a crowd came from no direction and every direction at once, voices overlapping like waves. "I am dreaming," Ilyra whispered. "No," said a voice behind her, gentle and amused. "You are sharing." She turned. The man from the flower stood a few paces away, awake now, eyes fully open and fixed on her. They were a deep, unusual shade, storm gray with flecks of silver that caught the dreamlight. He wore no vines here, no bindings. Instead, he stood in a simple tunic, the color of twilight, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms ribboned with faint sigils that glowed like ink viewed through tears. On instinct, Ilyra took a step back. "Who are you?" He smiled. The expression was wary around the edges, but genuine. "I believe," he said, "that I am the one you came to find, Prince Caelan of Somnora, at your service, though my service is somewhat complicated at present." Her heart stuttered. "You know me?" "I know that you are Princess Ilyra of the Verdant Court." His gaze softened as it moved over her, not in appraisal, but in recognition. "Your people have sung near my borders for generations. Your dreams brush this garden like moth wings. When you touched the petals, your name came with you." Heat rose to her cheeks, absurdly, even here. "I didn't intend to intrude." On the contrary, he took a step closer, then stilled, as if careful not to startle her. "I have been waiting a very long time for someone to intrude." She hesitated, then glanced up at the petal-filled sky. "Is this your dream?" "Yes and no." Caelan spread his hands. "This is the mid-layer, the shared space between my binding and your mind. I shaped some of it, long ago. The rest responds to whoever enters. You're already changing it." "I am?" She looked down. Tiny white flowers were springing up between the cracks in the stone at her feet, their centers tinged with the same green as her eyes. His smile deepened. "You see?" The surreal clarity of the moment pressed against her. Part of Ilyra remembered kneeling beside the central blossom, her hand on a petal. Captain Theron's alarmed shout was a faint echo at the back of her mind. Here, though, everything was sharp. Too sharp for an ordinary dream. "You're bound to that flower," she said. "Your body, I mean. You are asleep in the Garden of Somnora, in the eastern hills. We came because of a blight. Our fields are dying. Our people are plagued by nightmares. We found a fragment that spoke of you, of a garden, of balance." He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each word. By the time she finished, the playful curve had left his mouth, replaced by a line of quiet resolve. "It has begun, then," he said softly. "What has?" "The unraveling." His gaze lifted to the petal sky. One by one, some of the petals darkened, fading from luminous white to ashen gray. The entity that presses at the border between dreams and waking, what you would call a wraith, perhaps. Where I come from, we named it the Veilbinder. It feeds on what mortals dream in fear and grief and longing. When I allowed it to slip past me once, Somnora fell. Guilt threaded his voice, subtle but unmistakable. "You say, allowed," Ilyra said.
"You think it was your fault. Guardians who fail are still guardians," he replied, "but their failures carve deeper scars." He forced a breath, then looked back at her. "I bound myself to the garden so that my dreams could act as a net, catching and dissolving the Veilbinder's reach. For a long time it worked, but bindings erode. The garden weakens. My mind alone is not enough anymore." "The blight," she murmured. "It's where the net is thinnest." "Yes." He studied her closely now. "Yet you are here. This is important. No one has set foot in the garden in a very long time. The curses that warded it were meant to deter all but those with the proper resonance. My mother will be delighted to know I have proper resonance for forbidden gardens." He blinked, then laughed, a brief, startled sound that seemed to surprise him as much as her. "You make jest. That's good." "It's that or collapse," she said, allowing herself a small smile. "You said something about resonance. Do you mean somnoric affinity?" "Yes. Something in your mind, your way of seeing the world perhaps, aligns with the currents that move through this place." He tilted his head. "Tell me, Princess, do you dream often?" "Lately, yes," she admitted. "Restless dreams, shadows at the edge of fields, petals that turn to ash." "And before lately?" She had to think. "Not often. When I did, they were quiet dreams, small things. Reading in the library until the words turned to birds, walking through the vineyards at night, listening to the vines breathe." "That is not small," Caelan said. "That is precise." He stepped no closer, but his attention wrapped around her like a cloak. "You notice how things feel as much as how they look. That sensitivity is somnoric. You may have heard it called something else, but your people inherited it from us. From Somnora," she said slowly. "From you. From all of us," he corrected. "We did not vanish entirely when the kingdom fell. Our currents wove into yours." His gaze darkened. "But without a guardian, those currents can be twisted. That is what the Veilbinder is doing now." She swallowed. "If you are the guardian, can we wake you?" The question hung between them, the petals overhead holding their breath. He looked away, shoulders tightening. "If it were that simple, I would have woken myself." "There must be a way," Ilyra insisted. "The fragment spoke of a prince whose sleep holds back nightmares. It also said his sleep must be anchored by a royal mind. Somnora's crown, perhaps, but Somnora is gone." "Yes," Caelan said. "The original anchor died with my line. For centuries, the garden used what somnoric threads it could find in nearby mines. Dream fragments, echoes, enough to keep me tethered, barely, but not enough to wake me. I needed someone with intention. Someone who could meet me here fully. And now I'm here," she said, pulse loud in her ears. "And now, you're here," he echoed, frown tugging between his brows. "Your presence strengthens the tether. I feel it already. But it also paints a target on you. The Veilbinder will sense the new connection. It will try to use you to unmoor me completely, or drag you into the void along with me." "That's comforting," she said faintly. "It is dangerous," he said. "You have done your duty merely by finding the garden. You can leave, seal the place, find another way to defend your people." The suggestion sent an immediate protest flaring in her chest. Turn away when she could feel the garden's strain as if it were her own? When her kingdom's fields were dying from that strain? "You know that will not work," she said quietly. "You said it yourself. The bindings are failing. The Veilbinder is already reaching into our world. If you remain here alone, both realms will suffer." His jaw tightened. "I will not have your blood on my conscience as well as my people's. And I will not stand by while mine wither." She drew herself up, meeting his defensive gaze with steady resolve. "Our dreams are already being eaten. Our fields lie under your failing net. If there is something I can do, I must at least try. That, too, is my duty." He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she wondered what he saw. A sheltered princess playing at bravery? A convenient anchor? Or someone as frightened as he was, refusing to yield? "At least you are honest," he said finally, a sad sort of warmth in his voice. "Fear is permitted, you know. It does not disqualify you." "I would be very disqualified if it did," she said, "but I prefer my fear to be useful." A small silence fell. Overhead, a few of the ashen petals brightened, as if soot brushed from their surfaces. "How would this work," she asked, "if we tried to wake you?" "There are steps," he said. "Night by night, we would strengthen the anchor between us. We would share dreams, shaping this space together. As our bond solidifies, my consciousness will seep back toward my body. But the closer I come to waking, the harder the Veilbinder will press. It will attack your dreams. It will use your doubts against you." "I have plenty of those," she said dryly. "It will be spoiled for choice." "You can still go," he urged. "Tell your people to fortify their minds. Use whatever waking magic you have. Perhaps—" "You're stalling," she said softly. He flinched, as if she'd struck something unarmored. "You don't want to risk hurting me," she continued, "because you already believe yourself responsible for enough harm." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You are very perceptive, Princess. Perhaps that is part of this resonance you mentioned," she replied. "Perhaps it is why the garden allowed me through. Because I understand what it is to sit between duty and fear, and know that no choice will leave you clean." Their eyes met fully then. For a heartbeat there was no prince and princess, no guardian and anchor, just two people standing in a place made of their minds, both carrying guilt for things they had not chosen. At last Caelan exhaled, the sound rougher than before. "If you truly wish to attempt this," he said, "we must set rules, conditions. You will sleep near the garden each night. I will draw you here gently, so as not to overwhelm you. We will not push too far, too fast. The moment you feel your waking self weakening beyond what you can manage, you will tell me, and we will stop. Agreed?" "Agreed," she said. "And if at any point the Veilbinder touches your thoughts directly," his gaze hardened, "you will break the connection and flee. You will not stay to shield me. I can endure its presence better than you. You must prioritize your own mind." "I will try," she said, because she would not lie, even in a place woven from thought. A tremor rippled through the path under their feet. At the edge of her vision, a darkness thick as ink seeped between petals, leaving trails of ash. The world around them dimmed, as if a hand had partially covered the sun. Ilyra shivered. "What's happening?" "Our time is short," Caelan said, eyes scanning the shadows. Your body is still kneeling in the garden. If I hold you too long without preparation, the echo between here and there could strain your mind. I pulled you in gently, but returning you will still be a wrench. You mean this will hurt? She said. A little, he admitted, but it will be brief. I promise you that. Then send me back, she said, before Captain Theron decides to drag me out by force and severs the connection himself. He almost smiled. You speak of him like someone who has known him a very long time. He taught me to hold a sword straight, she said. He also taught me how to fall without breaking anything vital. I suspect both skills will be useful here. A flicker of respect touched Caelan's face. Then he sobered. Ilyra. She blinked. He had not used her title. The name alone resonated strangely in this place. Yes, tomorrow night, he said quietly. When you sleep, allow yourself to drift without fighting it. Think of the garden, of this path. I will find you. If we are to stand against the Veilbinder, we must begin strengthening our bond at once. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. Tomorrow night, then. He inclined his head in something like a bow. Thank you for coming. For not turning away. Thank me when our fields are green again, she replied. His gaze warmed, a flicker of hope glinting in the storm gray. I will. I would like to see them, one day. Awake. The dark creep between petals intensified. The air thickened, pressing at her ears. Caelan stepped back, raising a hand. Threads of silver light unfurled from his fingertips, cocooning around her like strands of silk. Hold on to the memory of this place, he said. Not the fear, the path, the petals, my voice. A shadow brushed his shoulder, and he grimaced. Go now, Ilyra. The world lurched. She felt herself pulled upward and downward at once, stretched like a cord between two notes. A low hum built in her bones, rising in pitch until it was almost a scream. Colors smeared, shattered, reformed. For a breathless heartbeat, she saw the garden from above. Its spiral paths, its wounded blossoms, the central flower with her own figure slumped against a petal, and Caelan's sleeping body cradled within. Then she hit her body like a stone dropped into a pool. Air rushed into her lungs in a ragged gasp. Real scents flooded her nose. Earth, sap, metal, sweat. Her knees ached. Hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her. Princess! Captain Theron's voice, sharp with fear. By the crown, are you with us? Ilyra blinked up at him. His face hovered close, eyes fierce, scar stark against pale skin. Over his shoulder, Marcan's worried face swam into focus. I'm here, she croaked. Her throat felt raw. I just went somewhere and came back. Marcan's fingers dug into her sleeve. You were frozen, he said, eyes open but not seeing. We called your name. You didn't move. It lasted breaths, but it felt longer. It was longer, she said weakly. Inside. Inside what? Captain Theron demanded. She turned her head. The central blossom glowed brighter now, its petals fully unfurled. The vines around Caelan's body pulsed faintly. His expression had changed, not by much, but enough that she saw it. The faintest crease between his brows, as if some part of him strained toward waking. I spoke with him, she said, voice soft but steadying. With Prince Caelan. He is alive, bound, and if I am to wake him, I must return to him in dreams. Marcan stared. You shared a dream with him? Already? Yes. Ilyra rose, legs trembling. Theron kept a firm grip on her arm. Every night, he said, if I allow him, he will pull me back there. We will strengthen the anchor between us, and I will help him stop what is causing this blight. The nightmares, Marcan breathed. The thing you mentioned, the veil? Veilbinder, she confirmed. The word tasted like smoke. It is real, and it will not be pleased that we spoke. A chill skated down her spine, as if someone had run a finger along her dreaming self. Captain Theron's grip tightened. "Your Majesty will never approve of this," he said. "Letting an unknown prince crawl through your dreams?" "He won't be crawling," Ilyra said, surprising herself with a flash of humor amid the fear. "He'll be invited." Theron groaned quietly. "That is not better, Princess." "We don't have another option," she said. "Not one that touches the root of this. You saw the garden. You saw him. We cannot simply turn around and hope our crops recover on their own." Marquand pushed his spectacles higher, eyes alight despite their worry. "If what you're saying is true, this is unprecedented. A Somnoran prince directly connected to the dreams of a verdant royal. The amount of power you two could—" "Marquand," she interjected. He flushed, reining in his excitement. "Yes, right. Dangerous. Terribly risky. But possibly our best chance." Captain Theron looked from one to the other, then at the looming flower. "We should withdraw," he said, "at least for now. This place feels like a battlefield waiting for a spark, and I'd rather report to Her Majesty while we still have all our minds intact." Ilyra nodded. Her head felt full of echoes, the garden's heartbeat, Caelan's voice, the whisper of creeping darkness. She cast one last glance at the sleeping prince. "I'll come back," she whispered, not sure if she spoke aloud or only in the lingering thread between them. "Tonight." For a moment, the petals around him fluttered without wind, as if in answer. Then she turned away, following her guards out of the Garden of Somnora, carrying with her the knowledge that when night fell, it would not bring rest. It would bring the first true step into a shared dream, and the beginning of a bond that might save both their worlds or pull them together into oblivion. The palace gardens felt smaller when she returned. They were still beautiful, rows of sculpted hedges, fountains singing to the sun, beds of flowers that hadn't yet succumbed to the gray. But after the wild, uncanny vastness of the Garden of Somnora, this curated space seemed almost fragile. A veneer of order stretched over something that could, at any moment, be pulled apart. Ilyra sat in her mother's private solar while late afternoon light lay in pale bars across the marble floor. The Queen's hounds slept near the hearth, their flanks rising and falling with the kind of peace Ilyra had once taken for granted. Now, sleep meant something else entirely. "Begin again," Queen Lumeris said calmly. "From the border stones." Ilyra swallowed and did as asked, relating their journey eastward, the subtle weight in the air, the first sight of the garden. She described the central blossom, Caelan's body cradled in its heart, the moment her hand met petal. And then her mother asked. "I fell," Ilyra said, "not in body, in mind. It was like being pulled through a stream made of voices. When I arrived, I stood on a path of stone under a sky of petals. He was there, awake, though his body remained asleep in the bloom. She kept some details close, the way he'd said her name, the little flowers sprouting at her feet in response to her presence. Those felt too private, too soft to expose to the cool appraisal in her mother's gaze. "And you are certain," Lumeris said, "this was no illusion? No trick of whatever curse holds him?" "It matched everything Marquand's fragment described," Ilyra answered. "Even words used in the text. He knew of our court, knew of the dreams brushing his borders. He spoke of Somnora's fall and of an entity he called the Veilbinder. He said it feeds on dreams and that his binding has been keeping it at bay. But the garden is weakening. Our fields are being touched because his net is fraying. The blight, the nightmares, this Veilbinder." "Yes." Lumeris rose from her chair and walked to the window, fingers resting lightly on the sill.
From here, Ilyra could see the terraces she had stood on that morning, the ash-streaked roses. The queen's shoulders were straight, her profile carved in thought. "And this prince," she said slowly, "proposes what? That you share dreams with him each night?" Ilyra's pulse kicked up. Yes, he believes a new anchor is needed, a sovereign mind with somnoric resonance. The fragment mentioned a royal line tethering him. Somnora's line is gone. Ours is not. Lumerus turned. Something flickered through her eyes, too quick to catch. "He asks you to risk your mind, your very self, for a magic our scholars barely understand, for a man whose last act, by his own admission, was failing to stop this Veilbinder from consuming his kingdom." "He didn't present it as a demand," Ilyra said, "more as an option he did not wish me to take." Lumerus's brows lifted faintly. "And yet you wish to take it?" "I believe it may be the only way to stop what's happening," Ilyra replied. "We can shore up our fields with wards and herbs, yes, but those will always be temporary defenses. They do not touch the root. This does." Silence stretched, full of the weight of decisions Ilyra could not begin to count. Her mother had carried a kingdom through famine and flood, border skirmishes and political intrigues. She had lost a husband once, and never spoken of how that loss felt. Ilyra knew better than to think this choice sat lightly on her. "Marquand," Lumerus said, without looking away from Ilyra, "tell me what you think." The scholar, who had been standing to the side, striving to look smaller than he was, jolted. "Your Majesty? You have studied the somnoric arts more than anyone in this palace," Lumerus said. "You have read the fragment.
You were present in the garden. Is this insane?" Marquand opened his mouth, closed it, pushed his spectacles up. "The prudent answer is yes, Your Majesty. It is, by any conservative measure, terribly unwise to tie your heir's mind in a knightly bond with a centuries-old magical construct guarded by an entity that eats dreams." Lumerus's lips twitched, just slightly. "And the candid answer?" Marquand's shoulders sagged. "The candid answer is, I agree with the princess. Everything I felt in the garden suggests we are brushing the edge of something immense. The somnoric currents there are, Your Majesty, they could drown entire armies. If we do nothing, the Veilbinder will continue to feed. Our people will become more exhausted, more unstable. Crops will fail. Without sleep, conflicts will flare. Our realm will crumble from within." He hesitated. "If there is a chance to strengthen the guardian who was meant to hold that line, I do not know when we will see another." Lumerus's gaze shifted back to her daughter. "You both seem distressingly aligned." "We rarely contrive it, Mother," Ilyra said. "It simply happens." "This prince, Caelan," Lumerus continued, tasting the name, "what do you make of him?" Ilyra searched for words that felt true without giving more than she should. "He is serious, burdened, but not cruel. He laughed at one of my remarks. It startled him, as if he hadn't done it in a long time." She let that small, fragile observation hang there. "He is afraid of hurting me. He tried to send me away." "I imagine he will not succeed," Lumerus said quietly. "Stubbornness runs in your blood." She studied Ilyra a moment longer. "What do you fear, child?" The question caught her off guard. For all their years together, her mother rarely asked about her feelings outside the realm of political calculation. "I fear failing them," Ilyra said, before she could shape a safer answer. "Our people, waking to find more fields gone gray, and knowing I could have done something, and chose not to. I feel losing myself inside someone else's dreams, but that fear feels smaller than the first." "And for yourself alone?" Lumerus pressed. "Not as princess, as Ilyra." She hesitated. She could name no courtly acceptable fear here.
so she chose the truth. "I fear waking up and finding that nothing in my life was ever truly mine," she said softly, "that every choice was made for me. This is frightening, yes, but it is mine. I walked into that garden. I stepped onto that path. No one pushed me." Lumerissa's eyes softened so suddenly it almost hurt to see. The queen crossed the space between them in 3 strides and lifted a hand, touching Ilyra's cheek, just above the jaw. The gesture was rare enough that Ilyra went still. "You are my daughter. If I say no, it is because I cannot bear to separate your mind from you in this way. If I say yes, it is because I trust you to walk where I cannot follow." Ilyra's throat closed. Then I will do what queens must," Lumeris continued. "I will weigh one life against many. I will resent the scale. And I will give you permission to do this, because the alternative is watching this realm rot while we cling to our fear." Relief hit like a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Under conditions," Lumeris added, her tone sharpening. "You will not do this unguarded. You will not vanish into that garden every night without watchful eyes on your sleeping body. You will sleep in the East Pavilion, closest to the garden, but within the reach of the palace wards. Marquand will craft protective circles. Captain Farron will select a rotation of guards. If any sign appears that your mind is fracturing, night terrors beyond recall, waking hallucinations, inability to distinguish dream from reality, this stops. Understood?" "Yes," Ilyra whispered. "Understood." Lumeris dropped her hand. The softness in her eyes banked once more. "Very well. Then tonight you may invite your prince into your sleep." The corner of her mouth twitched in wry disapproval. "I never imagined I would utter such words." Ilyra made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so tight. "Neither did I. Go, eat, rest while you can. Tell your captain and your scholar what I've decided. And, Ilyra," she turned at the doorway, "do not confuse this for a fairy tale," her mother said. "Stories leave out the parts where the hero flinches and doubts and bleeds. You may falter. That does not make you weak. It makes you living. Do you understand?" "I'll try to remember," Ilyra said. She carried those words with her through the corridors, past tapestries depicting ancient conquests and carved arches whose patterns had always comforted her. Today they felt like quiet witnesses. The palace itself seemed to listen as she walked. That night, the East Pavilion became hers. It stood at the far side of the palace grounds, nestled near a grove of cypress trees that seemed to lean toward the distant hills. Once used to house visiting dignitaries, it had stood mostly empty in recent months to conserve resources. Now servants aired out its rooms, stripped beds, and laid fresh linens embroidered with the verdant crest. Marquand oversaw the placement of charms like an anxious heron. He paced between the bed and the windows, scattering tiny glass beads etched with Somnoric sigils. "These will help dissipate excess resonance," he explained, more to himself than to Ilyra. "If the connection grows too strong, they should crack, giving us a very clear sign you're about to go wandering too far." "That's comforting," Ilyra said, sitting on the edge of the bed while a maid braided her hair into a simple plait. Her ceremonial coils felt suddenly excessive. Tonight she wanted as little weight on her as possible. "I'll be outside," Marquand continued, setting a small bowl of dried jasmine and chamomile near the headboard. "Just beyond the door. If you cry out, I'll hear. If you start speaking Somnoran in your sleep, I will also hear. Please don't. My translation skills are not that good yet." She smiled faintly. "I'll try to moan in verdant." He shot her a scandalized look, then realized she was teasing and rolled his eyes behind his spectacles. "You and Caelan will get along far too well. It's already inconvenient. Captain Theron appeared in the doorway, armored even in the lamplight. The perimeter is secured, he said. 2 guards at your door, 2 at each corner of the pavilion, more along the path to the main palace. No one in or out without my say-so. Except a prince of Somnora, Marquand muttered. Theron ignored him. If at any point this becomes too much, Princess, you command and we stop. I don't care if the Veil Eater is at your window personally promising to behave. You say stop, we stop. Agreed? Veilbinder, Ilyra corrected gently. And agreed. He looked as if he wanted to say more, then settled for a curt nod. Sleep lightly, he said. That is precisely what I'm trying not to do, she replied. When they were gone and the lamps dimmed, silence pooled in the room. Outside, crickets tuned their legs. Somewhere, a night-bird called low and mournful. The bed felt enormous beneath her, the sheets too clean, as if expecting someone worthier to lie upon them. She blew out the last candle and sank back, the ceiling an indistinct blur. Her heart beat too fast. She tried to slow her breathing, the way she had been taught before formal debates. Steady in, slow out. It helped a little. Think of the path, Caelan had said. The petals, my voice. She did. She thought of the pale stone underfoot, the sky full of luminous petals. She remembered the way his eyes had warmed when he'd said he wanted to see her fields awake. She let the memory of the garden's heartbeat rise up around her, not fighting the tug that came with it. This time she fell more gently. The sensation was still strange, like stepping off a ledge and finding not emptiness, but water that held her as it drew her deeper. The sound of crickets stretched, then blurred, turning into the rustle of distant leaves. The scent of chamomile and jasmine transformed into something crisper, like rain on glass. When she opened her eyes, she was standing on the path of pale stone again. Only this time, the sky above was not full of petals. It was full of lanterns. They drifted in slow patterns, each lantern a little sphere of light encased in thin, translucent paper. Some were painted with scenes she recognized, the palace terraces, the eastern hills, a market square. Others showed things she did not know, towers of impossible height, bridges made of starlight, faces that blurred when she tried to focus on them. "You came," said Caelan. He leaned against one of the path's low stone walls, arms loosely crossed, watching her with a half-smile that didn't quite hide his relief. Tonight he wore a deep green coat that reminded her faintly of verdant, formal wear, though its cut and embroidery were foreign. Wisps of dreamlight clung to the edges, as if the garment hadn't fully decided to exist. "I said I would," she answered. "Yes, but people say many things in dreams." "This is not only your dream," she pointed out. "It is mine, too." "Exactly," he replied, pushing away from the wall to join her, "which makes it twice as unpredictable and 4 times as stubborn." "Is that a mathematical rule of Somnoric arts?" He pretended to consider. "More of a proverb. Come, walk with me." They moved along the path together, lantern light pooling at their feet. The stone beneath them felt more solid than it had before, as if their shared presence anchored it more firmly. As they walked, the scenes on the lanterns shifted. One showed a field of wheat swaying in a breeze, only to ripple and become a lake under moonlight. "Where are we?" she asked. "In the mid-layer still," he said. "But tonight the space leans more toward you. These are your memories, your associations. Look." He gestured to a lantern hanging low nearby. When she peered into it, she saw herself as a child, sitting on the floor of the palace library, surrounded by towers of books. Her father sat beside her, laughing as she brandished a scroll at him like a sword at him. Her chest tightened, she murmured. "He gave me a treatise on irrigation techniques and told me it was as thrilling as any adventure epic if I read it properly." "Was it?" Caelan asked. "In parts," she admitted, "though I'm not sure he truly believed that." "Memory dresses itself," Caelan said softly, "sometimes grander, sometimes simpler than it was. Dreams use those costumes to speak in riddles." He reached up and tapped the lantern lightly. It drifted higher, its image fading into softer abstraction. She watched it go until it merged with the others. "I thought," she said, "that we would begin working, strengthening the tether, facing the Veilbinder. This feels—" she searched for the word, "gentler." "We will work," he said, "but we must lay foundations before we build. If I throw you into direct confrontation with an entity that devours consciousness on our first deliberate sharing, you will wake screaming, at best.
At worst, you will not wake at all." "That is a persuasive argument," she said dryly. "I've had time to think about these things," he replied. Then his expression grew more thoughtful. "Besides, the tether is not only made of power, it is made of understanding. Every time we walk here together, learn one another's shapes, your fears, my regrets, we make it harder for the Veilbinder to sever what we build. Knowledge is a kind of armor." "Does that mean I must show you all my most humiliating memories?" she asked, wary. He smiled, a real one this time. "Only the ones you cannot help bringing. The rest may remain safely buried in your mind, though I admit my curiosity is terrible." "I'll keep that in mind," she said, relieved at the levity. They walked further. The path curved gently, leading them past low walls now covered in climbing roses made of light. When she brushed one, it split into smaller petals that drifted upward, joining the lanterns. "You and the garden are related," she said quietly. "It responds to you. This place responds to me. Is that how we will strengthen the tether? By teaching each other's worlds to overlap?" "In a sense," he said. "The more stable this shared space becomes, the easier it will be for me to channel my power through you without burning you alive." Her step faltered. "Burning me alive is on the list of possibilities?" "It's a figure of speech," he said quickly, then winced. "A poor one. I apologize. What I mean is, magic can surge. If the channels between us are too narrow and untested, the force of it could overwhelm your mind. We must widen them gradually. That is what we are doing now." By walking and talking, she thought, by letting him see glimpses of her life and accepting glimpses of his. "Show me something of you then," she said. "If these are my lanterns, where are yours?" He tilted his head. "Bold." "Prudent," she countered. "You already know more about me than any stranger has a right to. It would only be fair." He regarded her for a moment, weighing, then nodded. "Very well. Hold your hand out." She did. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see faint star-like flecks along the line of his jaw, like Somnoric dust had brushed him and never quite left. His fingers brushed her palm, light as a petal, and closed around it. Warmth flooded through her, not the possessive heat of a flame, but the comfortable warmth of hands held under a shared blanket on a cold night. The path around them blurred. The lanterns shrank to pinpricks, then blossomed again in new shapes. Now they were walking along a balcony, not unlike the palace one she knew, but the city beyond was different. Towers of pale stone rose in graceful spirals, threaded with waterways that glowed faintly blue. Bridges arched between rooftops like ribbons. Strange trees with silver leaves lined the canals. "Somnora," she whispered. "As I remember her," Caelan said softly. "Dream memory smooths edges, of course. I'm sure the fish stench near the eastern markets is conveniently missing." She laughed, startled. "It's beautiful." "It was," he said. "We built it deliberately to blur the line between functional and wondrous. Our scholars believed beauty stitched the mind together, making it harder for entities like the Veilbinder to find entry points." "And yet it came," she said, gentle. "And yet it came," he echoed. "Our arrogance helped. We thought ourselves safe, and thus loosened our vigilance." He leaned on the balcony rail, looking out over the city. Shadows clung around some of the towers, like ink dropped into water. "We had a network of dream weavers once, not only me. But as the Veilbinder grew stronger, one by one my fellows fell. I stayed awake for days at a time, weaving nets, weaving warnings. When exhaustion finally claimed me, he shook his head. It slipped past. It tore through our collective dream and dragged a third of the city into permanent sleep. The rest, he didn't finish. The image below them flickered. For a moment, the towers seemed broken. Bridges hung half-fallen. The waterways ran dark. I chose the garden binding after that, he said. It was the only way to limit the damage. I tied myself to the old root systems, surrendered my waking body, and told them to go, to abandon the city and carry what seeds they could. And did they? She asked. Some, he said. Enough that your people inherited what you call low-level somnoric arts. Enough that their descendants built the verdant court. But they left me here, half god, half prisoner. Proper punishment, perhaps, for failing them. It wasn't only your failure, she said, the words out before she could temper them. He looked at her, surprised. You said it yourself, she continued. Your people grew complacent. Other dream weavers let their guard down. Your leaders ignore warnings. Why should you alone bear the weight of everything that followed? Because I was the last line, he said simply. When all others fell, I remained. When I fell, there was nothing to catch the Veilbinder. His mouth twisted. There is a kind of clarity in that. There is also a kind of cruelty, she said, to yourself. Cruelty in this case keeps me vigilant, he replied. Regret is a sharper goad than duty. She wanted to argue further, but something in his face, the weary set of his mouth, the way his eyes had gone distant, made her swallow the words. Healing a scar that deep would not happen in one walk across a memory. Instead, she touched the balcony rail, feeling the cool stone. If Somnora's beauty was meant to protect its people, she said, perhaps you should know. Some of it survived. In our cities. In the way we carve our fountains. In the lullabies my mother sang. You are not a ruin, Caelan. You are a foundation. He stared at her, as if no one had ever articulated that possibility before. Before he could respond, the lanterns around them flickered. A chill slipped through the air like a knife between ribs. The dream city's colors dulled. Sound retreated, leaving everything hollow. Ilyra's nape prickled. What is that? She whispered. Caelan's expression slammed shut, all softness gone. Back to the path, he said sharply. Now. Is it? Yes. His hand closed around hers again, grip firmer. And with a wrench, the balcony and city were gone. They stood on the pale stone path once more, but it had changed. Hairline cracks ran through it, pulsing slowly like veins. The lanterns overhead dimmed, their images warped. Instead of wheat and rivers and childhood libraries, she saw blurred faces twisted in sleep, mouths open on silent screams. Some lanterns were entirely dark, hanging heavy and cold. A murmur rose, not the gentle, crowd-like hum she'd heard before, but a layered whispering that irritated the inside of her skull. She couldn't make out the words, but they felt hungry. Her mouth went dry. It can reach here? It can reach where there is fear, Caelan said. Our conversation about my failures may have made us more visible. That is my fault. I should have steered us towards safer ground. Something moved at the edge of her vision, a lengthening of shadow that did not follow the contours of lantern light or their bodies. When she turned her head, it stilled, indistinguishable from the darkness between hanging spheres. How close is it? She asked. Too close, he said. We were right to begin strengthening the tether. Even this small intrusion would have been enough to unravel someone unprepared. But we must not let it grip more of you than it already has. He drew in a breath. Ilyra, I need you to help me now. Tell me what to do. This path, this mid-layer, it belongs to both of us. But tonight it leans more toward you. I can push the Veilbinder back, but that will draw on reserves I cannot yet afford to spend. If, instead, you shape something here, something of yours, something it cannot easily mimic, you can help anchor us away from it." "Shape? How?" she asked, trying to ignore the shadows thickening at the edges of the path. "Do you remember the library, the vineyards?" he asked. "The way you've always noticed how things feel. Focus on that. Close your eyes." She did, trusting his voice to keep her oriented. "Think of a place where you feel most wholly yourself," he said. "Not as princess, as Ilyra. Somewhere no one watches, no one asks anything of you." The first image that came was not the grand library or the rose terraces. It was a small storeroom tucked behind the kitchen gardens, one she had discovered accidentally as a child. No one had used it in years. Dust motes danced in shafts of light from a single high window. Old baskets and crates sat stacked neatly, long forgotten. She had hidden there with books, stolen fruit, dreams of elsewhere. Her fingers curled slightly. "I see it," she whispered. "Good," Caelan said, voice low and steady. "Now imagine it here. Feel the roughness of the crate under your hand, the smell of dried herbs hanging from the beams, the sound of your own breath, unconstrained by expectation." She did. She let the memory swell, filling the hollows left by fear. She remembered the cool floor under her bare feet, the way the dust did not bother her, because it meant no one else came there, the sense that in this small, forgotten space she could simply exist. The whispers around them grated more loudly for a moment, as if offended. Then something shifted. "Open your eyes," Caelan murmured. She did. They no longer stood on the pale stone path. They stood in the storeroom. It was exactly as she remembered it, yet suffused with a gentle dream-light that made the dust motes glimmer like tiny stars. Crates lined the walls. Bundles of dried lavender and thyme hung from the rafters. Her old reading corner, a stack of folded sacks beside a crate that had served as a table, waited in the far corner. The whispers outside were still there, a muffled static beyond the solid stone walls. The door, always stuck in waking life, now fit snugly in its frame, a barrier rather than a forgotten hinge. Caelan looked around slowly. His shoulders eased, tension bleeding away. "You see," he said softly, "you can shape this space." "You anchored us away from it." She let out a shaky laugh. "I just imagined the place where I hid from state dinners." "And you gave us a shelter in our shared dream," he said. "The Veilbinder can still scrape at the edges, but it cannot easily unmake what is born of your genuine memory, your genuine comfort. I could not have built this, only you could." The praise warmed her in a different way. "So this is how we fight it," she said, "with pantries and old crates?" "With honest places," he replied. "It feeds on the cheap, shallow images we build to impress others. The more real we are with ourselves, the less foothold it has." He touched one of the hanging bundles, watching it sway. "You did well. For a first shaping, this is remarkably stable." She exhaled, some of her fear draining away. "I suppose I should thank the palace architects for neglecting this room. If they'd used it more often, it wouldn't have been mine." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes what is forgotten by others becomes a sanctuary for us. The garden was like that, once, before it became my cage." "Then perhaps we're even," she said. "I gave you a room."
"You gave me a path." His gaze met hers, something unspoken moving in it. "Not even," he said, quietly, "but closer." The whispers outside the walls grew quieter, eventually fading to a background murmur. Some part of her mind registered that this was only a temporary reprieve. The Veilbinder had found them. It would return. But for now, the storeroom held. "How long can we stay?" she asked. "Not much longer," he said, regretfully. "Your body cannot sleep forever. and there are limits to how long I can hold you here without straining the tether. But each night we'll be able to stay a little more, do a little more. Tonight we have already done more than I expected. You shaped this place. You felt the Veilbinder and survived it. Survived seems a low bar, she said. Survival is the first bar, he replied. Everything else builds on it. She glanced at him. In the softer light of the storeroom, he seemed more human and less legend. She could see faint shadows under his eyes, as if the weight of maintaining his calm took effort. It occurred to her that she might not be the only one afraid. "I'm glad you're not doing this alone anymore," she said. He blinked. "You are the one risking your mind. And you are the one who sat in a flower for centuries to keep the rest of us from being eaten," she said. "You don't have to pretend this is not a relief for you as well." Something like color touched his cheeks. It was a subtle shift, but in this place, everything subtle felt magnified. "It is," he admitted. "I did not realize how quiet it had become inside my mind. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the eroded kind." He looked at her with something like wonder. "Your presence is loud, in a good way." She laughed, startled. "That's the first time anyone has called me loud." "Then they were not listening properly," he said. Before she could find an answer to that, the storeroom dimmed around the edges. A tug pulled at her navel, gentle but insistent. "You're waking," Caelan said. "Take this with you." He gestured around them. "Remember that you shaped it, that when fear creeps in, you are capable of more than enduring. You can alter the space that fear thinks it owns." "I'll try," she said, feeling the tug grow stronger. "Will you be here?" he finished. He smiled, small and sure. "I am always here, until we wake me up properly and I am somewhere else entirely." "An odd sentence," she murmured. "Welcome to Somnoric logic," he said. The tug became a pull. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to a breath. For a moment she thought he might reach out again, might touch her hand or her shoulder. But he only lifted his fingers, stopping just shy of her cheek, as if constrained by some rule she had not been told. "Good night, Ilyra," he said softly. The way he said it, like a blessing, like a promise, followed her up and out of the dream as everything dissolved into light. She woke to dawn and the sound of beads cracking. Her eyes flew open. The ceiling of the pavilion swam into focus, pale in early light. Markan's face appeared above her, hair sticking up at odd angles, spectacles slightly askew. "You're awake," he blurted. "Excellent. I was preparing a lecture you would never hear." She propped herself up on her elbows. Tiny shards of glass glittered on the pillow beside her. The bowl of etched beads sat empty, their fragments scattered like crushed ice. "How long was I?" she began. "A little past dawn," Markan said. "Longer than an ordinary night's dream, but not so long that I started throwing water on you. You twitched a few times. Once you muttered something about crates." She flushed. "That makes sense." "Did it work?" he pressed. "Did you strengthen the tether? Did you meet him again?" "Yes," she said. "We walked. We saw pieces of Somnora. And it came. The Veilbinder. It pressed close. We built a refuge out of a place in my memory. It withdrew." Saying it aloud made it sound strange and improbable, but Markan's eyes shone with fascinated horror. "You built structured dream architecture on your first deliberate sharing?" he whispered. "Do you have any idea how few Somnoran apprentices could do that?" "I have no idea how to gauge any of this," she admitted. "That's what I'm for," he said, already rummaging in his satchel for ink and paper. "Tell me everything, every sound, every image, every time you felt your teeth itch." "That seems excessive," she said, but she began to describe the night anyway. As she spoke, she watched his quill fly across the page, his brow furrowing at mentions of lanterns, storage rooms, shadows. When she mentioned the Veilbinder's whispers, his grip tightened. "We're earlier in its growth than Somnora was," he said. "It's taking bolder risks, but not yet tearing entire minds apart. That gives us a window, a narrow one." Outside the door, boots thudded.
Captain Theron stuck his head in, eyes sharp. "You're alive," he said. "Your confidence in me is overwhelming," Ilyra replied. "I am rationing it," he said dryly. His gaze flicked to the shattered beads. "Was that supposed to happen?" "Not on the first night," Marcon said, still scribbling. "It means the resonance was stronger than anticipated. We'll need a sturdier set, and perhaps some way to measure the exact point at which they crack." "We also need breakfast," Theron interrupted. "Princess, you look like you've been dragged behind a cart." She raised a hand to her hair, feeling the loose ends of her braid. "That seems uncharitable." "It's also my professional assessment," he said.
"Eat. Rest if you can. Then Her Majesty will want your report." Report. As if this were a simple mission, not the first step into a bond that tangled itself through her sleeping mind. Still, she nodded. Duty layered over everything else, steady as always. The days that followed took on a rhythm. By sunlight, the palace fought the blight with every practical tool at its disposal. Herbalists concocted new infusions, combining somnoric traces with traditional warding plants. Farmers were instructed in simple mental exercises to strengthen their dreams, grounding themselves in memories of harvest festivals, reciting generational planting songs before sleep, picturing their fields whole rather than dying. Ilyra sat in council sessions where ministers argued over rationing, border trade, the risk of mass panic if the nature of the threat became public. She traveled with delegations to outlying villages, listening to weary mothers describe children who woke screaming, to old men who had stopped sleeping entirely for fear of what they'd see. She carried hope with her in the shape of a secret, that each night she walked a path with a prince bound in a flower and learned how to fight the thing that gnawed at their collective rest. By starlight, she went back to him. Every night, the transition grew smoother. She would lie down in the East Pavilion, listening to the quiet conversations of the guards outside, the scratch of Marcan's quill in his vigil seat. Then she would close her eyes, think of the path or the storeroom, and feel the now familiar pull. Each time she arrived, the shared space shifted a little. One night they met in a version of the palace library, shelves stretching into darkness, the upper levels accessible only by ladders that grew and shrank on whim. The books hummed faintly, their titles changing when she tried to read them, reflecting questions she hadn't yet dared ask aloud. "Your mind is inconveniently metaphorical," Caelan said, plucking a volume off the shelf that read simply, "If not you, who?" "You talk like that's my fault," she said. "Of course it is," he replied lightly, "but I admit it makes for charismatic architecture." She sat on a conjured ladder, feet swinging, while he explained how somnoric currents flowed around minds like streams around stones, and how the Veilbinder acted like a dam, building up pressure until something cracked. Another night, they stood in a dream version of the blighted vineyards. Here, the vines withered not under a gray film, but under the weight of thick, tar-like shadows clinging to every leaf. "Push them off," Caelan said quietly, "not with your hands. With your recognition. See them as what they are, distortions, and remind the space of what truly belongs there." She imagined the vineyards as she remembered them, lush, green, alive with bees and laughter, wine-stained fingers. Her father stealing grapes and pretending the gardener hadn't seen. The sweetness of the first ripe harvest. The tarry shadows hissed and slaved away, curling like smoke. "It's not that simple in waking life," he cautioned. "But if enough people do this in their own dreams, it will help. You can teach them, even if they never know they're practicing somnoric defense." She pictured the tired villagers, the worn farmers. Will they be able to without training? "Some will," he said. "Others will manage small versions. Every bit matters." He hesitated. "We can build a pattern for them, a habit. The Veilbinder counts on people's despair. If we give them something else to do with their minds, it will find fewer open doors."
Slowly she began to understand. It wasn't only their bond that needed strengthening. The entire realm's dream habits needed shaping. She started slipping questions into waking conversations. To a group of children gathered at a well, she said, "My nurse used to tell me to picture my favorite place before sleep. Do any of you have one?" When they eagerly described tree houses and riverbanks, she nodded and suggested, in passing, "If shadows show up there in your dreams, try blowing them away like candle smoke. It works better than screaming." To a farmer whose hands shook as he spoke of recurring nightmares, she said, "I've been having them too. Sometimes it helps if I focus on one small good thing that's real, the way bread smells in the morning, or the feel of soil under my nails. The shadows hate specific joys. They prefer vague fears." It felt like sowing seeds in hard soil. Some would not sprout, but some might. Meanwhile, the bond between her and Caelan grew denser, more intricate. She could feel it now even when awake, a faint awareness at the edge of her thoughts, like the knowledge of someone standing in a room just beyond a thin wall. Not a voice, not words, just presence. Once, during a council session, a wave of weariness hit her so hard she almost swayed. For a heartbeat, the chamber faded, replaced by a flash of the garden, petals shivering, shadows pressing at the rim. She gripped the table. "Caelan?" His response was no more than a ripple of reassurance, but it steadied her. The vision vanished. She found Queen Lumeris's eyes on her, sharp. "Later," her mother said quietly, gesturing toward the maps. "For now, attend." Afterward, in the privacy of the solar, Lumeris regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and worry. "It is leaking into your waking hours," she observed. "Only briefly," Ilyra said. "Like echoes. I can manage it." "For now," Lumeris said. "If it grows worse, you will tell me. Do not think I will quietly watch you dissolve into two people." "I don't think I could manage two people," Ilyra said.
"One is already exhausting." Despite herself, the queen huffed a soft breath that might have been a laugh. "You are your father's child," she said. "When he believed in something, the world could be burning behind him, and he would still hold his line. It was infuriating." "It's comforting to know my flaws are hereditary," Ilyra said. "That wasn't the word I used," Lumeris replied. But her eyes were fond. "Go, dream. Bring me back something more useful than philosophical metaphors this time." Ilyra did not promise that. Metaphors seemed to cling to her like burrs now. But she went. On the 8th night, the Veilbinder nearly ripped her out of herself. She arrived to find the mid-layer chaotic. The path twisted on itself like a contorted spine. Lanterns swung wildly, their images flashing too fast. A face, a field, a pair of hands, a bed, all overlaid with crawling black. Caelan stood at the center of the storm, eyes closed, brow drawn in concentration. Threads of silver extended from his fingertips, trying to hold the path together. Each time a shadow surged forward, his threads flared, pushing it back. "Caelan!" she called, stumbling toward him. His eyes snapped open. Relief flickered and was gone. "You shouldn't have come," he said through gritted teeth. "That's why I did," she shot back. A wave hit them, soundless, but thick with dread. Images slammed into her. Fields barren under a red sun. Villagers lying motionless in their beds. Queen Lumeris sitting alone in an empty throne room, her crown crumbling to dust. The horror wasn't in the pictures themselves, but in the way they came, all at once, too big for her skull, trying to force themselves inside. She staggered, hands flying to her head. "What?" "It's trying a new tactic," Caelan said. "Instead of nibbling at the edges, it's pushing in a single heavy blow. It wants to see what breaks first, me, you, or the tether between us." "And if the tether breaks?" she asked, fighting for breath. "Then my binding loosens," he said shortly. "The garden may collapse.
The Veilbinder would slip fully into your world with no net. Stand behind me. No, she said, teeth clenched. We stand together. This is not gallantry, he snapped. This is strategy. You are less anchored here. If it grabs you, it already is, she hissed, as another wave crashed through her, this one showing Marcon's ink-stained hands slowly turning to ash. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the images back. Tell me what to do. He hesitated, torn. Then he swore in a language she didn't know. Fine, he said. We divide its attention. On 3, you pull as much of it toward you as you can. Think of everything you fear, everything you've told no one. It will gorge on the invitation. That sounds terrible, she said. It is, he agreed.
But while it's distracted, I can strike its core. We can wound it deep enough that it will retreat to recover. And if we fail, then we improvise, he said, which she suspected meant, then we die creatively. She set her jaw. 3, then. 1, he said, eyes flaring brighter. She dragged in a breath, feeling fear coil at the base of her spine. 2. She thought of the worst things. Her mother's body on a bier. The palace overrun by enemies. Her people blaming her, calling her foolish, selfish, arrogant. She thought of waking up blank, unable to remember her own name, of looking at Caelan and seeing only a stranger. 3, he said. She opened herself. She had expected the Veilbinder to rush in like a beast through an open door. Instead, it flowed, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the access. Cold slickness poured into her thoughts, turning familiar anxieties monstrous. Whispers sharpened into words. You are nothing. You will fail them. He will abandon you. You are only here because everyone else was smarter. For a terrible moment, she believed them. Then, through the onslaught, another voice threaded in. Ilyra. Caelan's voice, not spoken aloud, but resonant through the tether. It anchored to something in her chest she hadn't realized was exposed. These are not yours, he said. They are echoes wearing your face. Claim only what you recognize. Let the rest pass through. Easier said than done, she wanted to retort. But even that spark of complaint was hers, and she clung to it. Claim what she recognized. She recognized the fear of failing her people. That was hers. She recognized the dread of becoming a puppet. Also hers. But, he will abandon you? No. That fear belonged to stories she had been told, not to this moment. Caelan had given her no reason to expect it. She let that whisper slip by, refusing to claim it. The more discerning she became, the less the Veilbinder's words stuck. They still hurt, like wind-driven sand, but they did not burrow in. I have it, she managed, voice ragged. Do it. Caelan lifted his hands. Silver light erupted from his palms, not as threads this time, but as spears. They shot outward, puncturing the darkest pockets in the lantern sky. Where they struck, the shadows shrieked, not in sound, but in a tearing sensation along her nerves. The path shook. A shape tried to form in front of them, something coalescing from the swirling black. It had no fixed outline. Sometimes a cloak, sometimes a mass of wings, sometimes nothing but teeth. The only constant was the sense of hunger. It lunged toward her. Instinctively, she summoned the storeroom. Not with the deliberate care of before, but with raw desperation. She thought of dust, of crates, of the smell of dried herbs, and the feel of cool stone under her feet. The forgotten room slammed around her like a dropped curtain.
The Veilbinder's reaching tendrils scraped against solid walls, leaving black streaks that smoldered but did not pierce. Caelan appeared beside her an instant later, breathing hard. Good, he said, though his voice shook.
Very good. What did we— she began, but then the storeroom shuddered. A crack shot through the wall, letting in a sliver of writhing dark. We heard it, he said. Not enough to kill, enough to provoke. It will retreat to adjust. When it comes back, it will be smarter. Wonderful, she said faintly. We're teaching it. We're teaching ourselves faster, he said. That is the hope. Her knees gave out. She sank onto the crate that had served as her childhood table. Her hands trembled. I don't know if I can do that again. You will not have to, he said immediately. Not like that. We forced its hand. It showed us a deeper part of itself than it intended. That knowledge is ours now. Does knowledge taste as bitter as this? She asked. It often does, he softly. For a few breaths they simply existed. Her fear ebbed slowly, as if being siphoned away. She realized his own hands were shaking. Silver lines along his forearms pulsed erratically. You're hurt, she said. Drained, he corrected. There is a difference. I used more force than is safe at my current level, but it was necessary. You could have warned me, she muttered. Would it have changed your answer? He asked. She thought of it. Of him saying, this may kill us both. Of her picturing the blight creeping further, the villagers' hollow eyes. No, she admitted. Then warning you earlier would only have made you more afraid, he said. Fear has its uses, but in excess it paralyzes. I trust you to know when you've had enough. I do not wish to drown you in what you already recognize. It was a strange kind of comfort, this bluntness. I don't know if that was wise, she said. Neither do I, he replied. That is the unfortunate truth of most decisions. Despite the residual terror, despite the shaking walls and black streaks, something in her eased at that admission. He was not a flawless guardian. He was a man doing his best in a trap he had helped build, trying to spare her as he dragged her into the fight. We survived, she said. For tonight, he agreed. The storeroom's edges blurred. You're waking, he murmured. Rest. Tomorrow we will focus on gentler exercises. I will not ask this of you again so soon. I may need to sleep for a week, she said. In that case, we'll have ample time for both gentler exercises and existential crises, he said. She would have laughed if she had the energy. As the dream pulled away, she felt again that impulse to reach out. This time, she did not hesitate. She placed her hand over his, where it lay on the crate. His eyes widened slightly. The contact was warm, grounding. We're in this together, she said, voice fading. Do not shoulder it alone again. He looked at their joined hands, then at her. You have my word, he said. The world dissolved. When she woke, she was already crying. Tears soaked her pillow, hot and silent. Her chest felt bruised. The pale morning light made the pavilion seem too bright, like a world painted over a nightmare that still clung beneath. Markand was there, of course. He thrust a handkerchief at her with hands that trembled. You were thrashing, he said hoarsely. We almost— Theron had to hold me back from shaking you awake. I thought if we interrupted, it might snap something. I hated making that choice. She wiped her face, trying to assemble herself. We forced it back, she said, but it found us. It knows our bond now. Can it come through you? He asked. Not yet, she said. We're still contained, but the pressure is building. He sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders sagging. Her Majesty needs to hear this, he said. Soon. She will, Ilyra said, after I can stand without falling. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Then, quietly, Are you afraid? Yes, she said, and I am also certain. Of what? He asked. She thought of Caelan's shaking hands, of his unwilling confession that he was relieved not to be alone, of the way the storeroom had formed around them both, a refuge made from her forgotten corner, and his stubborn belief that knowledge mattered. That this is the path we have, she said, and that if we walk it together, Caelan, me,
all of us. We may yet lead the Veilbinder somewhere it cannot follow." Markand looked down at his ink-stained fingers. "You two talk like storybook characters," he said. "It's unnerving." "We're tired, not dramatic," she replied. "There's a difference." "I suppose we'll find it in the footnotes," he said. She managed a weak smile. "I'll let you write them." He groaned. "Saints preserve us." Outside, the day went on. Farmers rose to tend gray-edged fields. Ministers shuffled papers, weighing the cost of evacuation versus endurance. The blight spread, slow but relentless. And when the sun set again, the princess of the verdant court lay down in her guarded pavilion, closed her eyes, and reached once more for a prince she had met only in dreams, knowing that with each night, the distance between sleeping and waking, fate and choice, would narrow a little more. The first sign that something had changed came not in a dream, but in a field. Ilyra stood beside a farmer in the village of Halvan, watching as he ran a calloused hand over a row of vines. Weeks ago, these vines had hung limp under the gray film of the blight. Today, the film was thinner. The leaves still drooped, but their veins pulsed with a faint, renewed green. "See that?" the farmer whispered. "It's as if the gray pulled back a little, like it lost its grip." Ilyra nodded, trying not to let relief show too strongly. "Have your dreams been any different?" she asked. He scratched his beard, thinking. "Aye, used to be I'd see shadows at the edge of the rows, hear my children crying and never find them. But lately, when they show, I remember what you said." His mouth twisted in a half-shy smile. "About blowing them away like smoke. About thinking on the harvest festival. I picture my eldest trying to juggle apples and falling on his backside. The shadows don't like it. They pull back." "Good," she said softly. "Keep doing that. Every night. Tell your neighbors what you told me." "I have," he said. "They think I've gone soft in the head, but some of them tried it anyway. Those who did," he gestured to the field, "their rows look a little better too." She touched a leaf. It quivered under her fingers, as if listening. The blight had not reversed completely. The damage was still evident, but it was no longer advancing at the same merciless pace. There were pockets of resistance, places where people had taken her strange advice and, without knowing the word for it, practiced dream defense. "You're doing well," she told the farmer. "You and your family." He flushed with pride. "You're the one walking into cursed gardens, Highness. I'm just sleeping differently." "Sometimes," she said, "that's where the true battles happen." On the ride back to the palace, Markand could barely sit still. "This confirms it," he said, tapping his notes. "The villages where people have been using your techniques show measurable slowing in blight spread. In some cases, slight reversal. It's not uniform yet, but the pattern's there. We're shaping somnolent behavior at scale, Ilyra. Do you know how outrageous that is?" "Outrageous in a good way, I hope," she said. "In the best way," he replied. "We're gathering the first ever field study data on collective somnoric response. If I live through this, my treatise will be insufferable." "If we live through this," Captain Theron muttered from the front of the column. "Don't forget that part." Ilyra's fingers tightened on her reins. "We will," she said quietly. "We have to." She thought of Caelan, of the storm of shadows they'd faced together days before, of the way the storeroom had cracked under pressure. Since that night, he had insisted they limit themselves to gentler exercises, walking memories, practicing controlled shapings, learning how to withdraw quickly at the first sign of strain. He had kept his word. He had not asked her to open herself to the veil at that depth again. But the entity's presence lingered at the edges of every dream now, like a storm biding its time beyond the horizon. "We're making small gains," Markand said, as if reading her thoughts. "For now, that has to matter." "For now," she echoed.
The "for now" stretched into a week. Each night the pattern repeated. She lay down in the pavilion, slipped into the shared space, and found Caelan waiting. Sometimes he stood on the pale stone path, sometimes in her storeroom, once, memorably, reclining on a branch in a dream tree whose leaves were pages from books. "What?" he said when she stared up at him. It seemed efficient. They trained, in their strange way. He taught her how to weave thin filaments of somnoric light around the lanterns that represented troubled sleepers in her realm, reinforcing them without forcing her will upon them. "You cannot simply fix people," he said. "That is how guardians become tyrants. You can offer structure, suggestions, but dreams must still be their own." "Does the Veilbinder respect that rule?" she asked. "It respects nothing." His mouth tightened. "That is what makes us different from it. Remember that when you're tempted to shove peace into someone's mind without their consent." She bristled. "I would never." "You might," he said gently, "if you were desperate enough. If someone you loved was suffering and you thought you could stop it with a single push. Good intentions and cruelty are separated by thinner walls than people like to admit. That's why we must set our boundaries now, while we can still think clearly." It was not a rebuke so much as a warning he aimed at himself as much as her. She nodded, chastened. In return, she shared small pieces of her life, deliberately, rather than letting them leak unpredictably into the dream. She showed him the rose terraces as they had been before the blight, the tree she and her sister had climbed despite all the rules against royal daughters scuffing their knees, the market day when she'd first realized people lower their voices when a princess walks by, not out of respect, but so she won't hear the truth. "These are the things you protect," he said, watching a dream vendor toss bright scarves in the air. "Not my memory of Somnora's glory." "We protect both," she said, "yours and mine." "Mine is ash," he replied. "Yours is foundation," she countered, repeating what she had told him before. The words had become a refrain between them now, a small mantra she refused to let erode. He never agreed aloud, but he stopped arguing with quite the same bitterness. The more time they spent in the shared space, the easier it became to forget he was a legend. He tripped over his words sometimes, fervent and scholarly like Marquand when he slipped into explanation. He teased her about her penchant for hiding in small, unnoticed places. He grew fiercely protective whenever the Veilbinder so much brushed the edges of their dream. She, in turn, grew increasingly aware of how his gaze lingered on her, not just as an anchor, but as a person. The way his eyes softened when she laughed, the way he listened when she spoke of her fears, without trying to tidy them up into something nobler. One night, they sat in the storeroom, backs against the same crate, shoulders almost, but not quite, touching. "I used to talk to the walls here," she confessed, watching dust motes drift. "Lonely princess?" he asked. "Lonely person," she corrected. "Princess is only the shape of the cage. I could see everyone, but there were layers between us, expectations, titles, my mother's gaze. In here, I was just Ilyra. I could be petty and selfish and frightened without thinking of what it meant for the Vergent court." "Did you think you weren't allowed to be those things outside this room?" he asked. "If I had been," she said, "I might not be sitting here now." He was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that your realm is fortunate your selfishness is so limited." She snorted. "You've only seen the curated parts. I can be dreadfully ungracious when asked to dance with ministers twice my age. I will hold off on my condemnation until I have observed this behavior myself," he said solemnly. "You never will," she replied. "When, if, you wake, they'll trip over each other to impress you, guardian from the old stories, after all. Then you will have to tell me when they're ridiculous," he said, "so I know where to aim my more pointed compliments." She felt her cheeks heat. "You assume I will remain near you." "Don't you?" he asked quietly. The question lodged in her throat. Of course she did. The idea of waking him only to send him off to some distant outpost felt wrong. Their bond had tangles in it now, threads of understanding and shared fear and wry humor. Pulling them apart would hurt. "I don't know what will be asked of us," she said honestly. "Of you, of me. My mother thinks 10 moves ahead. She may decide having an ancient guardian share a border with us is too dangerous." "She might," he said. "She may also decide that an ally who shares Somnoric language with her daughter is worth the risk." "You make me sound more important to that calculation than I am," she murmured. "You are the anchor," he replied. "Without you, I remain a story in a flower. That matters more than you think." The thought left her both steadied and shaken. "When this is over," she said softly, "if we succeed, I want things to be quieter. Not in the sense of nothing happening, but in the sense that people sleep, that laughter doesn't sound frayed around the edges, that we can walk through a field and only worry about whether it needs water." "Modest ambitions," he said. "They're enormous," she replied.
His shoulder brushed hers, the contact light but deliberate. "Then we will chase enormous quietude together," he said. She did not lean into him, but she did not move away. The turning point came on a night when the stars over the real palace were unusually bright. Ilyra had stood at her pavilion window before bed, looking up at the sky. The constellations seemed sharper, as if the air had been scrubbed clean. It felt like the held breath before a storm or before a confession. Inside the dream, everything was dark. Not in the heavy, smothering way of the Veilbinder's presence. This darkness was like the blank page before ink. No path, no lanterns. Just a sense of vast space. "Caelan?" she called, fighting down a ripple of unease. "I'm here," his voice came from the right. He stepped into her field of vision, silhouetted in the black. As he approached, light bloomed around him, like ink spreading through water. The pale stone path emerged under their feet. Lanterns flickered overhead, one by one, like stars kindling. "What happened?" she asked. "I thought it best to start from nothing tonight," he said. "Blank spaces are easier to control. The Veilbinder has been studying our usual terrains. It's time to change the pattern." A chill skated along her arms. "Has it done something?" "Not yet," he said, "but it is restless. I can feel it pulling at the bounds of the garden. The more success your people have in resisting it, the more it will seek another route. Tonight, we go deeper." "Deeper?" she repeated. "Into the garden itself," he said. "Not just this mid-layer. Your body will still lie outside it, but your mind will walk closer to the root of my binding. We need to understand its structure if we are to alter it." "And the risk?" she asked. "Higher," he said, "honest. If you lose your way, it will be harder for me to pull you back. But we won't be wandering aimlessly. I know the paths." She swallowed. "Then lead." He offered his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. The bond between them hummed, brighter than before. For an instant, she could feel the echo of his heartbeat as if it were her own. The path beneath them shifted. The lanterns overhead dimmed, replaced by something else. Blossoms. They were enormous, hanging upside down from an unseen ceiling, petals curving inward like cupped hands. They glowed faintly blue-green, bathing everything in underwater light. "This is still the mid-layer," Caelan said, "but we stand closer to the garden's mind now. The boundary between my dreaming and the root's memory is thin." She realized they were no longer merely walking through a projection of the garden. They were within its idea of itself. Each blossom pulsed in time with a heartbeat she felt in her bones. "Does it think?" she asked. "In its way," he said. "Plants think slowly. They remember water, sun,
the paths of those who walk among them. When I bound myself here, I grafted my consciousness onto that deep memory. That is why I've lasted this long. It's also why waking me is not as simple as cutting vines." They walked between the hanging blossoms. Some bore gray around the edges, the blight reaching in even here. Others shone pure. "The Veilbinder gnaws at this level too," he said. "If it ever fully severs my awareness from the roots, it will flood the garden with nightmare and push through into your world unimpeded." "So we need to strengthen the graft," she said. "Add another strand." "Precisely," he said. "The binding was constructed for one royal mind and one guardian, Somnora's crown and me. That crown line is gone. You must take its place. But that means your mind will be more deeply entangled with mine than it is now." "How?" she asked, pulse quickening. "Enough that what harms one will bleed into the other," he said quietly. "Your people's phrase would be tied fates. If I fall, you may be dragged with me. If you shatter, I may unravel." She pulled her hand back slowly. "You did not mention that before. Would it have changed your decision?" he asked. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I would have needed time to decide if it was my choice to make at all." He flinched as if struck. "I am sorry. I convinced myself it was better not to burden you with that detail until you were ready." "That detail could cost my life," she said coldly, "and my mother's line. You don't get to keep that from me in the name of protection." He looked away. The light from the blossoms traced the tense set of his jaw. "You're right," he said. "I have been a guardian too long. It is a habit, deciding which truths people can bear. I forget that you are not my subject. You are my partner." The word hung between them, heavier than the blossoms. She exhaled slowly. Anger and fear tangled in her chest, but beneath them something steadier pulsed. He had made a terrible call. He knew it. He admitted it. "Don't do it again," she said. "If we are tying our fates, I want every frayed thread on the table, Caelan. No omissions." "You have my promise," he said. "Promises from guardians appear to be dangerous things," she muttered. "Then consider this one double-bound," he replied softly. Silence stretched. The blossoms swayed gently, whispering against one another. She thought of the farmer in Hulven, of the children at the well, of her mother's face, composed and strong, lined with worry she rarely showed, of Marquand, gambling his pride and his sanity on untested Somnoric theories, of the way the blight had slowed, not stopped, but slowed, because of the work she and Caelan had done. Tied fates. "If we do nothing," she said, voice low, "what happens?" "The Veilbinder continues to press," he said. "The garden weakens. Your realm collapses under exhaustion and failed harvests. Eventually, the entity has a world-sized feast of broken minds. And you?" "I remained bound until there is nothing left to guard," he said, "which is another kind of death." "And if we proceed," she pressed. "We may wake me," he said. "We may restore balance. Or we may fail and die together, taking both realms with us. Or," he hesitated. "Or," she demanded, "or we may wound the Veilbinder enough that another generation can finish what we began," he said softly. "Not much comfort, perhaps, but better than nothing." She caught his gaze. "You think in centuries. It becomes a habit when you live in one flower for that long," he said. She huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. "I think in seasons, in faces, in tonight and tomorrow. I cannot promise to see as far as you do, but I can choose what I do with what is in front of me." "And what is in front of you?" he asked.
You, she said simply, and this garden, and my people, all tied together whether I want it or not. If binding my fate to yours gives us a better chance to pull them through this, then, she swallowed, then I will do it. But this time, Caelan, we do it with our eyes open. A muscle jumped in his cheek. I do not deserve that trust. I know, she said. Trust isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. I am very tired of having my choices made for me. Slowly, she extended her hand again. For a heartbeat, he did not move. Then he stepped forward and took it, his grip careful, as if she were made of spun glass. Then we bind. The blossoms brightened, their glow intensifying until everything else faded. Threads of light unfurled from Caelan's chest, from hers, twining together in the air between them. When they touched, a jolt shot through her, shock and warmth and something like grief all at once. "What do I do?" she whispered, breathless. "Remember who you are," he said. "Bring that into the binding. Not your title, not your obligations. You, the girl who hid in storerooms, the woman who walked into a cursed garden because she could not bear to watch her people suffer from afar." "Ilyra Marivelle," she said, as if introducing herself to the bond. "Daughter of Lumeris, sleepless, stubborn, afraid, but moving anyway." He smiled, a little sadly. "Caelan of Somnora, son of no one now. Tired, ashamed, still willing to try." The threads between them pulsed, accepting. Then pain. Not physical exactly, but a wrenching sensation as pieces of herself stretched toward him and pieces of him slid toward her. Memories of spiral towers, her father teaching her irrigation treatises, his hands weaving nets of light over a sleeping populace, her first time riding a horse alone, wind tearing tears from her eyes. For a frightening instant, she could not tell which belonged to whom. "Hold the edges," he said, voice tight. "Do not let the bond blur us. We are not becoming one person. We are becoming adjacent." "Adjacent," she managed through clenched teeth. "Conveniently vague word." "It's all Somnoric theory had," he replied, a half-strangled laugh in his tone. She focused on boundaries, on the feel of her own body, its weight, its contours, the familiar ache in her knees from too many hours standing in council, on the particular cadence of her thoughts, on the way Caelan's presence felt distinct, like a second heartbeat she could hear but not control. The pain ebbed, easing into something else, a deep, abiding connection. She felt rooted, both in her own body and in something larger, older. The garden's heartbeat was clearer now, thrumming through her. She could sense the spread of its roots, the way they brushed forgotten wells, ancient stones, the bones of long-decayed trees. "Is it done?" she whispered. "In part," he said. He looked different, no longer pale with constant strain, but suffused with a subtle glow. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes had smoothed. "The tether is thicker. The garden recognizes you now as a second anchor." She reached out with her mind tentatively, touching that awareness. The garden responded, not in words, but in a sense of relief, like a weight shared. Then, like a drop of ink in water, something else bled in. She saw, for a heartbeat, a cluster of villagers tossing and turning in their sleep, dark smudges clinging to their faces. The Veilbinder pressed there, testing. Her attention snagged on it. The entity's head, or what passed for one, turned, sensing the new presence. It surged along the fresh bond. "Caelan," she gasped. "I feel it," he said grimly. "It tasted the binding. We must." The dream shattered. She slammed into her body with a force that knocked the breath out of her. Her eyes flew open to darkness lit by flickering lamplight. Shouts came from outside the pavilion. Markand stood at the foot of her bed, wild-eyed, clutching a charm that glowed so bright it hurt to look at.
You went still, he said, voice high and shaken. The beads all shattered at once. The wards screamed. And then the pavilion shook. Not metaphorically. The floor jolted beneath her, sending her sprawling. Cracks spidered across the ceiling. Dust rained down. Outside, a guard screamed, a short, cut-off sound. Captain Theron burst through the door, sword drawn. "Shadows," he barked, "inside the wards. We're under attack." Ilyra staggered to her feet.
The world swayed, a double image overlaying reality. The pavilion, and, superimposed, the garden's central blossom, petals half closed against swirling darkness. "The Veilbinder," she said. Her voice sounded wrong in her own ears, as if two tones spoke at once. "It's here." Marcon's gaze darted to her, horrified. "You sound doubled," he whispered. "Useful observation," Theron snapped. "Does it help us not die?" Ilyra pressed her hands to her temples. She could feel it, the entity pushing against the palace wards, using the fresh pathways of the strengthened bond. It had found a crack between worlds and was prying it open. "Ilyra," Caelan's voice murmured in her mind. It no longer needed the mid-layer path. The binding carried him more clearly. "The garden is under siege. The Veilbinder is using your pavilion as an echo point. If it breaks through in either location, it will flood both. Tell me how to stop it," she whispered aloud. "Anchor," he said. "You tied your fate to mine. Now we must use that tie to redirect the force. You will stand where you are and hold the line. I will do the same here. Together we shift the pressure away from the weak points." "That sounds like everything we just did, but harder?" she said through clenched teeth. "Yes," he said, "but now we have the structure for it. Ilyra, look at your hands." She did. They glowed faintly, silver-green vines of light curling along her veins, echoing the sigils on his forearms. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Marconde made a choking sound. "You're resonating," he breathed. "She's, by the old texts, this is never—" "Marconde," she snapped, "later." He shut his mouth with an audible click. "Captain," she said, turning to Theron, "I need you to keep anything with a pulse away from me. If someone touches me while I'm doing this, I don't know what will happen." His jaw clenched. "Define anything with a pulse, Princess." "Everyone," she said, "including you." He looked like she'd asked him to stab himself. "I am not leaving you undefended in the middle of an attack." "You won't be," she said. "Caelan will be with me. You defend the perimeter, I'll defend the line." Theron swore under his breath, eyes blazing. "If you die, I will never forgive you." "If I die, your forgiveness will be the least of my problems," she replied. He let out a harsh breath. "Fine. Do your Somnoric whatever. We'll hold the door." He turned and barked orders. Guards formed a ring at the pavilion's threshold, blades flashing as shadows began to seep under the edges like spilled ink. Marconde hovered at her side, fists clenched. "Ilyra, if I say step back, she told him. "If I say run, you run." "But—" "Marconde," she said, gentler, "you've trusted me this far. Trust me a little more." He swallowed hard, then nodded and retreated to the far wall, clutching his glowing charm. Ilyra closed her eyes. "Tell me what to do," she said to Caelan. "Feel the bond," he replied. "Not the fear, the thread between us. Follow it to its midpoint." She reached inward. The new tether pulsed, thicker now, a rope of shared light. The Veilbinder's pressure pressed along it like a flood. She followed the cord mentally, walking a path that existed only in their joined consciousness. The pavilion's noises dimmed. The garden's heartbeat rose. When she opened her inner eyes, she stood in a space that was neither her storeroom nor the flower-hung mid-layer. It was simpler, a circle of bare earth, a single young tree at its center. Half its branches bore verdant leaves, half bore somnoran silver needles.
Caelan stood on the opposite side of the tree, arms braced as if against a gale. Shadow wind whipped his hair and coat. The tree's branches thrashed, leaves and needles tearing free in a storm of light. "This is the anchor point," he shouted, over the roar she did not hear with her ears. "This is where our binding roots." "How poetic," she yelled back, "and by poetic I mean precarious." The Veilbinder surged in from all sides, an encroaching wall of darkness. It hissed at the tree, at them, at the very concept of structure. Where it pressed hardest, the ground cracked, revealing glimpses of churning void. "We can't hold this," she said, panic skittering along her spine. "Not by pushing against it directly," he agreed, "but that's not what we're going to do." "Then what?" she demanded. "We redirect," he said. "Think of irrigation channels. You do that, yes, with your fields?" The metaphor clicked immediately. Ditches dug to carry excess water away, sluice gates to control flow. "We let some of it through," she realized. "Into where?" "Back into itself," he said. "We feed it its own echoes. It's been eating your people's fear for months. That fear has shape now. We can use it as a mirror." "That sounds very clever," she said, "and also like it might go horribly wrong." "Most clever things do," he replied. "Come." He reached for her hand across the circle. She stepped forward, gripping back. Together, they pressed their free palms to the tree's trunk. Instantly, the world bloomed. She felt the dreams of thousands of sleepers brush against her awareness, fragile, fragmented, vivid. A child dreaming of flying on a goose's back. A mother dreaming of losing her child in a crowd. A soldier dreaming of laying down his sword and finding no one to take it up.
The Veilbinder had fed on all of these, warping them, stretching the fearful parts until they drowned everything else. "Do not get lost," Caelan warned. "We're looking for one thing, the point where fear curdles into despair. That is where it drinks deepest." She searched. In dream after dream, she found moments where hearts had wavered on the edge of giving up. Farmers staring at gray fields, young lovers parted by duty, old friends estranged. The Veilbinder's presence was strongest there, its tendrils wrapped tight. "There," she said, focusing, "those knots, there, and there." "Good," he said. "Now, we take the way it twisted those feelings and twist them again." "How?" "By remembering what came before," he said. "Fear is always a response to something. Despair is what happens when we forget the rest. Family, joy, longing. We must send those back down the line. Not to cure everything, only to muddle its meal." She thought of the farmer's laughter at his apple-juggling son, of Markan's ink-blotted excitement, of Theron's gruff, unbending care, of her mother's rare, fierce touches, of Palin's softened eyes when he called her partner. She poured those into the bond. The tree's roots lit up, channels of light racing outward. The Veilbinder snarled, not in words, but in a flaying gust of raw emotion. It slammed against them, enraged. The redirected current hit it like a reflection, showing it not just fear, but the stubborn, inconvenient joys it had tried to strip away. The entity recoiled. Its own shapelessness wavered, fragments of stolen dreams sloughing off. For a moment, Ilyra glimpsed something beneath the shadows. Not a face, but a void where a face should have been. A terrible hollowness that made her want to weep. "It's empty," she whispered. "It eats because it's empty." "All hungers do," Caelan said tightly. "That does not mean we let them devour us." The Veilbinder fled. Not entirely. Pockets of shadow clung stubbornly near the tree's circle. But the massive pressure ebbed, relieved through the channels they'd opened. The storm wind died. The tree straightened. New leaves sprouted where old had torn away, some verdant, some somnoran, all trembling but alive. Ilyra sagged to her knees, chest heaving. Sweat, if sweat existed here, soaked her dream tunic. Her hand slipped from the trunk. Caelan caught her before she fell face first into the earth. His arms wrapped around her shoulders, solid and shaking. "You did it," he murmured. "You held." "We did it," she corrected weakly. "That too," he said, sounding half-dazed. For a moment, just a moment, they stayed like that, tangled in each other's arms, the smell of earth and dream bloom between them. His heart hammered against her cheek. She realized her own pulse had synced to his rhythm, their shared bond knitting them into a single, steady beat.
She became acutely aware of every point of contact, his hand at the back of her head, his breath stirring her hair, the warmth of his chest. An answering warmth rose in her, complicated and fierce. She pulled back slightly, enough to see his face. He looked different. There was color in his cheeks now, light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The lines of guilt and isolation were still etched into his features, but something softer threaded through them. Hope, perhaps? Or simply the shock of no longer being alone at the anchor point. "Ilyra," he said, her name a rough thread between them. "Yes," she managed. "There is something I should tell you," he said, eyes flicking to her mouth, then away with almost painful restraint. "When you bound yourself to me, you gave me more than an anchor. You gave me leverage. Against the Veilbinder, against my own fear. I do not know if I can ever repay that." "You're not a ledger," she said, throat tight. "I'm not a debt to be tallied." "No," he agreed. "You're something else." Silence stretched, taut and fragile. The air between them felt full of unsaid possibilities. A whisper scraped along the edge of her mind, faint and bitter. Not the Veilbinder, nothing so overt. This was her own voice, dredging up an old fear. "He is bound to you by necessity, not choice. Do not mistake partnership for affection." She flinched inwardly, stung. Caelan's eyes sharpened. "What was that?" he asked. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just echoes." "Not nothing," he said. "The binding carries more than magic. It carries that one clearly." Mortification flushed through her. "Wonderful. Now you can eavesdrop on the worst room in my head." "I would rather not," he said gently. "But when it spills into the anchor point, it affects the bond." "So my insecurities are now a strategic liability," she muttered. "Truly, this arrangement gets better and better." "Ilyra," he said. There was something in the way he said her name that made her look up. "I am bound to you by necessity," he said. "That is true. Without you, I cannot finish what I began. But that is not all I am bound by." His expression flickered, vulnerable and resolute. "I have grown to care for you, not as a symbol, not as an anchor, as a person who insists on walking into danger with her eyes open and her heart still intact. If you disappeared from my life tomorrow and my binding somehow persisted, I would still feel that loss as deeply as any soul torn from me." Heat flooded her, this time laced with something joyous and terrifying. "That is a very Somnoran way of phrasing things," she said faintly. "We were not known for our brevity," he said, "but I can try a simpler version if you prefer." "What would that sound like?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He touched her cheek lightly. "I like you," he said, "very much." The straightforwardness of it undid her more than all his elaborate declarations. She laughed, a small, disbelieving sound. "Despite my inconvenient metaphorical mind?" she asked. "Because of it," he said. "I like you too," she blurted, the words tumbling out on a rush of relief. "Very much. It's infuriating." His smile broke like dawn. "Good," he said. They sat there for another moment, breathing in tandem, the trees' leaves rustling softly above them. The bond hummed, not with strain now, but with a quiet, steady warmth. Then,
The circle blurred. "You're being pulled back," he said reluctantly. "The pavilion?" "Is probably a mess," she finished. "I should go." "Yes," he said, and did not release her hand immediately. "Ilyra." "Yes," she said again. "Remember this," he said. "Not the battle, not the emptiness of the Veilbinder. This, the tree, the anchored circle, my words." "For a guardian, you are very sentimental," she murmured. "For a princess, you are very cruel," he replied, eyes bright. She squeezed his hand. "Good night, Caelan. Good night." The anchor point dissolved. The circle, the tree, his face, all fractured into shards of light that rushed away. She followed them, up, until... She snapped awake. The pavilion was chaos. The floor bore scorch marks where shadows had tried to seep in and been forced back. The air smelled of burned herbs and ozone. The ward charms Marquand had set were cracked, some shattered entirely. Guards lay slumped against the walls, unconscious but breathing. Captain Theron sat by the door, sword still in hand, head bowed. He looked up when she moved. Relief washed over his features so forcefully he didn't bother to hide it. "You're alive," he said. "You don't sound surprised," she rasped. "You've become annoyingly difficult to kill," he said. "I'm adjusting." Marquand staggered to his feet from where he'd been dozing against the far wall, quill and parchment fallen at his side. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Did we redirected it," she said. "It pressed hard. We pressed sideways." He gaped at her, then laughed, a shaky, borderline hysterical sound. "You two rewrote some Noric theory while we were trying not to be eaten by shadows? Of course you did." Theron eyed the glowing traces still lingering along her veins. "Whatever you did," he said, "do it again, if it keeps those things out." "It wasn't a one-time trick," she said. "It was a change in the way the binding works. The Veilbinder will be angrier, but less stable." Marquand seized his parchment, scribbling furiously. "This will have ripple effects throughout the dreamscape. We'll see secondary impacts, shifts in people's nightmares, perhaps even in their waking anxieties. If we can harness—" "Marquand," Theron said. "Right. Food, sleep, then metaphysics," the scholar amended. Ilyra pushed herself up, legs trembling. Every part of her felt stretched thin, but underneath the exhaustion there was a new steadiness. She could feel the garden more clearly now, a constant presence at the back of her mind, and through it she could sense Caelan, not as a voice this time, but as a quiet, enduring warmth. In the days that followed, the effects of what they'd done rippled outward. Reports came from outlying villages of nightmares changing. People still dreamed of their fears, but the dreams ended differently now. A woman who had repeatedly dreamed of her son drowning began dreaming of him learning to swim instead. A shepherd plagued by images of wolves attacking his flock found that in his sleep he now remembered where he'd hidden a whistle to call his dog. The blight didn't vanish, but in some places it stopped creeping forward altogether, as if it had hit an invisible boundary and decided the meal wasn't worth the effort. Ilyra slept less in total, but more deeply when she did. Each night with Caelan knitted their bond tighter, not only through shared danger, but through smaller, quieter moments. He learned to make tea in her storeroom, fumbling humorously with imaginary kettles. She taught him verdant card games, improvising rules when she forgot the real ones. They argued about history, strategy, the ethics of influencing dreams. Once, he coaxed her into sharing one of her more embarrassing memories, a state dinner where she had misheard a foreign dignitary's name and addressed him as a root vegetable. He laughed until his eyes watered, the sound echoing through the dream in a way that made her chest ache with a kind of fragile joy. She began to look forward to sleep, not merely as duty, but as reprieve. Which, she supposed, was the most dangerous part of all.
For if the Veilbinder had learned anything from this last clash, it was that the bond between guardian and princess had become not just a tool, but a vulnerability, one that, sooner or later, it would try to exploit. And as Act 3 of their strange shared story drew to a close, the shadow beyond the hills gathered itself, watching, calculating, waiting for the moment when love and duty would pull in different directions, and the line between them would blur. The first sleepers were found in the orchard. Ilyra stood amid the trees, half of them still green, half dusted in gray, as the healer knelt beside a boy no older than 10. His chest rose and fell, his eyelids fluttered, but no amount of shaking, clapping, or murmured coaxing had brought him fully awake. "It's like he's stuck halfway," the healer murmured, fingers hovering above the boy's brow. "Not quite here, not gone."
"His mind is pulled inward. Nightmares?" Ilyra asked softly. "Perhaps, at first," the healer said, "but now, I'm not sure he dreams at all." 3 more lay under the neighboring trees, adults this time. An old woman who had always led harvest songs, a stooped man who managed the irrigation channels, a girl with wind-tangled hair and soil still under her nails, as if she dropped mid-row. All breathing, all unreachable. "Has anyone else in the village?" "Not yet," the healer cut in too quickly. "But they're afraid to sleep. The few who do are the exhausted ones, the busy ones. They drop where they stand." Ilyra looked up through the branches at the bright, untroubled sky. It felt wrong that such a serene day could cover something so cold. She touched the girl's arm. It was warm but slack. She closed her eyes, reaching inward for the bond. "Caelan," the answer came, immediate and concerned. "I feel it. They are not dead. But the Veilbinder has wound their dreams in on themselves. They are caught in a loop of unending falling." "Can you reach them?" she asked silently. "Not directly," he said. "If I pull too hard, the entity will use the line to bite at you instead. It is consolidating, eating fewer dreams more deeply. It's choosing richer meals," she murmured. The healer looked up. "Highness?" "Nothing," Ilyra said quickly. "Continue tending them. Keep them comfortable. Do not let anyone force them awake with cold water or blows. It will only make things worse." "What should we do then?" he asked, helpless. She swallowed her own helplessness. "Sing," she said. "Speak to them. Tell them stories that end with waking. Remind their minds that there is an after to this." It sounded feeble even as she said it, but the healer nodded, grasping at anything that felt like action. On the ride back, the air smelled of ripening apples and fear. "The pattern's changing," Marquand said, poring over the reports already. "Fewer new nightmares. More cases like these. Deep sleep that doesn't release. It's like it's tired of being pushed back at the edges," Ilyra said. "So it's going for the core," Captain Theron grunted. "Give me something I can stab instead of metaphors, and I'll be happier." "You and me both," Marquand muttered. Ilyra's thoughts flickered to the anchor tree circle, the way the Veilbinder's essence had recoiled when their redirected channels hit it. They had forced it to taste more than fear. It had not liked the flavor. Now it was adapting. That night, in the shared space, Caelan looked drawn. She found him on the pale stone path, lanterns dim around them. His shoulders were tense, eyes shadowed. The bond between them hummed louder than usual, threaded with worry. "You saw it?" she said. "Yes," his mouth thinned.
"The sleepers in your orchard are not the first. 2 in the north, another near the old border stones. Pockets where the Veilbinder has decided to dig deep rather than spread wide."
"Can we cut them loose?"
she asked. "Like trimming rot from a root before it spreads?"
"Not without severing their minds,"
he said quietly. "We can't simply slice through their dream knots. We'd take pieces of them with it."
Her throat tightened. "Then what can we do?"
"For now," he said, "hold the line. Keep it busy with us so it has less freedom to burrow elsewhere. And
Perhaps consider going deeper than we have before.
Deeper how?
She asked warily. The garden's roots touch more than memory, he said. There is a core beneath the anchor point, a place where the first binding was laid. Until now, I have kept us above it. It is not a place for visitors.
What's there?
She asked. The original agreement, he said. The pattern Somnora used to externalize its nightmares. The seed from which the Veilbinder grew.
She stared at him. You told me it was born from corrupted dream weaving.
It was, he said. Our scholars thought they could prune fear from our people's minds by giving it a home, a vault where their worst images could be stored and dissolved. I argued for it. I believed we could outwit the darkness by naming and isolating it.
And instead, she said, voice low, you gave it a body.
His flinch was slight but undeniable. Yes.
Anger flared in her, at his people's arrogance, at the centuries of consequences. But it cooled quickly under the weight of his obvious guilt. This was not news to him. He had lived with it for lifetimes.
If the core is where it began, she said, forcing calm into her voice, then it might be where we end it.
Or where it ends us, he said. It knows that place intimately. It has chewed on it, reshaped it. If we go there, we walk into its preferred terrain.
Would it make a difference, she pressed, to the sleepers, to the blight?
If we could unmake the original pattern, he said, we might cut off its ability to anchor into minds as it does now. It would not destroy fear. It should never have tried to. But it would remove the unnatural teeth we gave it.
She thought of the boy in the orchard, the old woman, the way their chests had risen and fallen in useless rhythm. How do we reach this core? He hesitated. You won't like the answer.
I haven't liked any of the answers so far, she said. Tell me anyway.
You would need to sleep closer to the garden, he said. The further your body is from the roots, the more strain on the bond. To descend to the core, you must be almost within its soil.
The East Pavilion won't be enough, she murmured.
No, he said. You would need to come to the garden itself. The thought sent a rush of cold through her. Sleeping in the garden, inside the very ring of power they were trying to control, felt like stepping into a storm with arms open. My mother will never allow it, she said. Then we find another way, he began. She shook her head. You told me not to make choices for you. I say the same back. Don't assume her answer, Caelan. She's not only a queen, she's also my mother. That complicates everything in ways you cannot calculate. I can, actually, he said quietly. I watched my own mother make similar calculations once. Pain flashed through his expression. She reached for his hand on reflex, lacing their fingers. Then you know she deserves the chance to choose, Ilyra said, even if it hurts. He squeezed back. You are very fond of pain, it seems. I'm fond of truth, she replied. They walk together often. When she woke, she went directly to the queen. Lumeris listened in silence as Ilyra described the sleepers, the deepening knots in the dreamscape, the existence of the core. Marcan stood to the side, fidgeting with a quill, his face pale. Theron leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw muscle twitching. Let me be sure I understand, Lumeris said at last. There is, beneath this garden, a place where your Somnoran friend and his people once decided they could tame fear by putting it in a box. Not a box, Marcan said involuntarily. More of a... Lumeris turned her head slowly. Do not say metaphysical cistern to me right now, Master Elevar. He closed his mouth, abashed. No, Your Majesty. And this box grew teeth, she continued. It learned to bite. It became what we now face. Yes, Ilyra said quietly. And you wish to go to it? Yes, with your mind. And my body close by, Ilyra added quickly, before her mother could suggest sending her mind alone. The strain would be too great otherwise.
The bond could snap. We might lose everything we've built. Lumeris's fingers drummed once on the arm of her chair. Where would you sleep? In the garden, Ilyra said. Near the central blossom, inside a ring of wards Marcan designs, surrounded by guards. Theron made a strangled sound. You want to camp in the middle of the cursed place that tried to eat your mind last time? I want to give us the best chance of reaching the thing that will eat it if we do nothing, she shot back. Lumeris's gaze flicked between them, then settled on Ilyra. You already sleep with one foot in the garden every night, she said. You want both feet now. Yes, Ilyra murmured. For one night, perhaps two. Long enough to reach the core and see if there is a way to reshape what was done.
The blight is slowing, but these sleepers... Mother, we can't leave them like that. Not if there is a path, however narrow, that might free them. The queen stood without haste, every movement controlled. She walked to the window overlooking the eastern hills. From this vantage, the Garden of Somnora was not visible, tucked beyond the last ridge. But Ilyra could feel it, a quiet pull in her bones. Lumeris spoke without turning. When you were born, she said, I promised myself I would never treat you as a pawn. You would have choices. You would not be bartered like coin. I have kept that promise poorly, perhaps, by letting you stand in chambers like these and be weighed against maps. That was my choice, Ilyra said, throat tight. Yes, Lumeris said. At first, because you did not know what refusal looked like. She glanced over her shoulder. Now you do. And yet you keep stepping forward. Someone must, Ilyra said. I know, Lumeris replied. I have been that someone for longer than you've been alive. She turned fully now, the weight of her crown heavy but not overpowering. Lines of fatigue scored the corners of her mouth, but her eyes burned bright. I cannot make this safer, Lumeris said. I can only make it honest. If I say no, you will go anyway, one way or another. I know you. You are my child. If I say yes, I tie my hands and my heart to a peril I cannot control. There is no choice here that does hurt me. Then let me help carry the hurt, Ilyra whispered. For a long moment, mother and daughter simply looked at each other. The queen who had stood alone against countless storms, and the princess who had walked into a cursed garden because she could not bear to watch from a balcony. At last, Lumeris exhaled. Very well, she said. You will go to the garden. You will sleep there. Markand will build you a fortress of wards and stubborn ink. Theron will ring that fortress in steel. I will ring it all in the authority of this crown. She reached up, unfastened the small coronet she wore for private meetings, and stepped forward. Gently, she placed it in Ilyra's hands. This is not the full weight of verdant rule, she said, but it is a piece. Our scholars say the original binding required a crown to anchor it. Take this with you. Let your Somnoran prince's roots know they now touch more than a story of a lost line. They touch a living one. Emotion surged so swiftly that Ilyra had to bite her lip to keep it from spilling over. She bowed her head, fingers closing around the cool metal. I will bring it back, she said. You will bring yourself back, Lumeris corrected. The metal is replaceable. You are not. Theron cleared his throat roughly. When do we leave? At dusk, Lumeris said. If we're doing this, we do it before I have time to change my mind. Or before fear finds new words for you, Ilyra. It already has too many, Ilyra said. But I'll go anyway. Markand pressed a hand to his chest. This is the part where I say something wise, he muttered. Unfortunately, I can only manage, please don't die. I'll do my best, she replied. Your best had better be very good, he said, voice breaking slightly around the edges. It would have to be. The garden at night was a different creature.
When they'd first found it, dawn had lain over its blossoms like a veil. Now, under a sky strewn with stars, its glow was its own. The petals of the outer flowers held their faint luminescence, shivering like captured moonlight. The central bloom, with Caelan's body still cradled in its heart, pulsed more steadily now, responding to the reinforced bond. They set up the camp at a respectful distance from the central stem. Marquand walked the perimeter, dropping charms, stones, glass beads, small metal rings, into the earth, muttering under his breath. Each charm flared briefly as it sank, leaving a faint ring of light that encircled Ilyra's palette like a halo. "These wards will dampen external somnoric interference," he said. "In theory," Theron repeated, unimpressed, as he assigned guards to their posts. "In practice, I've never done this before," Marquand admitted. "But the design is sound. There's a redundancy in the sigils that should—" "Marquand," Ilyra said gently, "it's enough." His mouth snapped shut. "If the Veilbinder breaks through, I expect you to blame the entity, not my calculations." "If the Veilbinder breaks through, I'll be too busy to blame anyone," she said. The central blossom's petals rustled, though no wind stirred. She felt the bond tug, like a hand reaching toward hers. "Ilyra," Caelan's voice murmured through the link, "you are close." "Yes," she whispered inwardly, "we're here." The garden answered with a subtle shift. Some of the ashen edges on nearby flowers lightened, as if the proximity of crown and anchor soothed their rot. Theron guided her to the palette. "This feels wrong," he muttered. "That's becoming a theme," she said. "I should be the one lying there," he grumbled. "You're too valuable to risk." "You don't have somnoric resonance," she pointed out. "You'd just get regular nightmares." "I'd take them," he said fiercely. She touched his arm. "You've carried enough battles for me," she said. "Let me carry this one." His jaw worked. Then he stepped back, signaling the guards. Swords glinted as they took their positions in a ring, backs to her, eyes outward. Marquand handed her a small talisman, a simple bronze disc etched with a spiral. "If you can, bring this with you into the dream. Touch it at the core." "I want to see if we can imprint anything on the binding. If we can't, at least I'll know." "Leave it to you to treat this as research," she said, taking it. "Someone has to write the footnotes," he replied. "Now, go, before I think of 12 new reasons this is a terrible idea." She lay down. The earth beneath the pallet was firm, cool. The scent of the garden wrapped around her, sweet petals, damp soil, something sharper underneath, like iron and storm. The coronet rested on her chest, its weight a reminder of the countless lives balanced on the edge of this choice. She closed her eyes. The descent was immediate. There was no gentle slipping this time, no gradual fading of waking sounds. One moment she felt the rough weave of the blanket beneath her fingers. The next, she stood in the circle with the anchor tree, the Somnoran needles and verdant leaves both trembling in a wind she did not feel on her skin. Caelan waited, hands braced against the trunk. "You took long enough," he said, though his eyes shone with relief. "I lay down seconds ago," she replied. "Time is a suggestion here," he said, "and your heart took its time catching up." She stepped to his side, placing her hand beside his on the bark. The tree thrummed beneath their palms, a living conduit between realms. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but go anyway." He smiled faintly. "Good answer." He spoke a word in Somnoran, a low, resonant syllable that tasted like flint and rain. The ground split. Not violently, rather it opened smoothly, the circle widening into a spiral stair of roots and stone. They coiled downward into darkness lit by a dim, bluish glow. "The core," he said. "Once we step off this circle, we will be fully within the binding's original structure. The Veilbinder will feel us there as surely as you feel your breath." "What happens if we fall?" she asked. "We fall until we stop," he said. "Let's not test that." She huffed out an unsteady breath. "Very well." Hand in hand, they stepped onto the first route. The descent felt longer than any dream should allow. The walls around them pulsed faintly, veins of light tracing old sigils carved into the stone. Some symbols she recognized from Marcan's books. Others were older, more intricate. At intervals, they passed what looked like windows, oval openings that showed glimpses of Somnora as it had been and as it had fallen. In one, she saw a council chamber full of scholars arguing, diagrams of circles and ladders filling every surface. Caelan stood among them, younger, eyes bright with conviction. "We cannot continue to drown in our own nightmares," his echoed past self said. "We must give them channel, form." In another window, she saw people sleeping peacefully, their dreams siphoned off into a great reservoir of light.
At first, the image was beautiful. Fear transformed into something luminous, contained. Then, slowly, the light darkened. "It started well," Caelan said quietly as they descended. "For a time, the nightmares lessened. People slept more easily. We congratulated ourselves on our ingenuity." The next opening showed the reservoir, no longer calm but roiling. Shadows coalesced at its center, forming a vortex. Light twisted, drawn in. "We did not account," he said, "for what happens when you gather fear in one place and ignore it. It took shape, hunger, identity of sorts." The following window showed chaos. People running through Somnora's graceful streets as those who slept failed to wake. The sky roiled with the same vortex, threads of nightmares spilling out. Ilyra tore her gaze away. "Enough," she said. "You've punished yourself with these images long enough." "They're part of the binding," he said. "The Veilbinder uses them as justification. It believes we owed it this feast." "Do you?" she asked, sharper than she intended. He stopped, hand tightening on hers. The stairs stretched below them into dimness. "No," he said finally. "I believe we owe it our defiance, and our regret, but not our surrender." "Then let's go tell it that," she said. They reached the bottom. The core was not what she expected. She had imagined a cavernous chamber, or perhaps a singular oppressive presence. Instead, they stepped into a space that looked disturbingly like a simple room. 4 walls, barely defined. A floor, bare. At the center, a low stone basin, filled with a viscous, dark substance that writhed sluggishly. Symbols ringed the basin's rim, the same ones she'd seen in the windows, but here crisp and uncorrupted. "This is it," Caelan said, voice hushed. "The first pattern, the place we poured our nightmares into." "It's small," she said. "Fear often is," he replied. "It only pretends to be endless." The substance in the basin shifted, sensing them. The air thickened. Whispers rose, not chaotic this time, but focused, as if the Veilbinder spoke through every ripple. "You return, guardian," it hissed. "And you bring a friend. How generous." Ilyra's skin crawled. The voice wasn't like the crude taunts of their earlier clashes. It was smoother now, more defined. "Hello to you too," she said, keeping her tone even. "Bold," it murmured, "fragrant with mortal pride. You taste of crown and dust." "I taste of annoyance," she said. "Get it right." Beside her, Caelan's lips twitched. "It's evolving," he said quietly. "Language, structure. The more we've bound it, the more it has learned." "You taught me," it replied. "All your scholars, all your bright webs. You gave me shapes and names. You fed me on your fears and called it penance. I am your masterpiece."
"This is why one should never compliment one's own work too highly," Ilyra muttered. Caelan stepped forward, placing his hand on the basin's rim. Light flared around his fingers, reacting to the sigils. "Enough," he said, voice firm. "You want a conversation? Then listen. We are here to end what we began.
not by feeding you more, but by changing the terms. The substance writhed, splashing against the sides. "End?" it echoed, tasting the word. "Little guardian, you are bound. You are mine as much as this basin is. You sleep in my garden. You dream my fragments. You cannot end me without ending yourself." "That may be," he said, "but I am no longer alone in this choice." It turned its attention to Ilyra fully. She felt its scrutiny like cold fingers trailing over old scars she'd mostly managed to forget. "You would tether yourself to this failure," it mused. "Become wrought with him. Why?" "Because your existence is hurting people who never chose you," she said. "And because I am tired of watching the consequences of a mistake be used as an excuse for more harm." "Righteous," it purred, "delicious. Do you know, your fear of failing them tastes better than any simple terror. I could make a feast of you, princess." "You've already been nibbling at my edges," she said. "You haven't done a very good job of it." It hissed, the basin's surface spiking. Caelan squeezed her hand once, a silent reminder that bravado had limits. Then he drew a breath. "We are not here to argue with you," he said. "We are here to rewrite the pattern." "Rewrite?" it repeated, mocking. "You bound yourself to the old lines. You strengthened them with your crown. You are woven into me now." "Which means we can affect you from within," Ilyra said. "As long as we remember we are more than what you eat." The Veilbinder surged. The room dissolved. She found herself standing in a corridor in the verdant palace, sunlight slanting through the archways. Everything looked normal, familiar. She could smell bread baking, hear distant laughter. Too quiet, she thought. She turned a corner and saw her father. He leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, exactly as he had sometimes waited for her after lessons. His hair was the same dark bronze, threaded with early silver. His eyes crinkled when he smiled. "Ilyra," he said, warmth in his voice. "Walking the halls alone again? You know your mother worries." Her heart lurched. Rationally, she knew this was impossible. He had been gone for years, buried under an olive tree he had planted himself. Yet the ache of missing him never quite dulled. "This isn't real," she whispered. "Isn't it?" he asked. He pushed away from the pillar and approached. "You have always walked in the space between what is and what might be. Why should this be any different?" His hand was warm when he reached for hers. The feel of it tugged at something deep within her, a memory of being small and safe. "You could rest here," he said. "Stay in this corridor forever. Let others fight. You've done enough." Temptation rolled over her, thick and sweet. To stop, to let the garden and the Veilbinder and the failing fields drift away. To lean against this sun-warmed stone and listen to her father tell stories of treaties and triumphs. A faint voice threaded in, distant. "Ilyra, Caelan." She held on to that sound like a rope, looked again at her father. In all her memories, he'd never told her to stop. He'd pushed her, encouraged her to read more, ask more, risk more. "You're not him," she said, voice shaking. "He believed in my duty. He wouldn't tell me to hide from it." The figure's expression sharpened. His grip tightened painfully, turning cold. "Little thing," the Veilbinder purred, voice seeping through the illusion. "You stand at the edge of oblivion and cling to duty? Why? There is peace in sinking, quiet." "Peace without choice isn't peace," she said through gritted teeth. "It's erasure." Sparks danced at the edges of her vision. She remembered the anchor tree, the feel of Caelan's hand in hers, the coronet resting on her chest in the waking garden.
She remembered the farmer blowing away his nightmares like smoke. She remembered who she was. Ilyra Marivelle, she said, louder, daughter of Lumerus, friend of Markand, princess of the verdant court, anchor of the sleeping prince. I have work to do. The corridor trembled. Cracks veined the stone. Her father's face flickered, distorting, eyes hollowing, mouth stretching too wide. You are stubborn, the Veilbinder hissed. Your end will be all the more satisfying. Come earn it, she said, and tore her hand free. The palace shattered around her, dissolving into shards of shadow and light. She fell, plummeting through images, the orchard sleepers, the blighted fields, Somnora's spiraled towers, until she slammed back into the core room. She gasped, knees hitting the floor. Caelan was there, his own shoulders heaving, eyes wide. Dark streaks ran down his arms, like ink burns. "Are you—" he began. "I'm here," she said. "You?" His laugh was ragged. "It tried to show me Somnora restored," he said. "My city rebuilt, my people alive. It almost worked." "Almost," she echoed. The basin boiled. "You will tire," it snarled. "You will falter. You cannot hold truth against comfort forever." "You misunderstand us," Caelan said, rising. His voice was hoarse but steady. "We do not reject comfort. We reject lies dressed as it." He flung his hands out. The sigils around the basin flared, their original patterns rising, overlaying the twisted currents the Veilbinder had woven. "Ilyra," he said, "the talisman." She had forgotten the bronze disc in her palm. It lay there now, warm.
She stepped forward, heart pounding, and pressed it against the basin's rim. One of Markand's spirals glowed, mixing with Somnoran lines. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, everything did. The basin's contents surged upward, hitting an invisible barrier formed by the intersecting symbols. Light and darkness collided, sending shockwaves through the room. The Veilbinder screamed, not in words, but in a sound like tearing fabric and shattering glass. "You trespass," it shrieked. "You deface my vessel." "We reclaim ours," Ilyra shouted back, though her head rang. "You are not the only thing that gets to write in this place." The spiral expanded, threading its way into the old pattern. Verdant curves slipped between Somnoran lines, altering angles, shifting emphasis. Where the binding had once directed fear into a stagnant pool, it now began to carve channels outward, away from the basin, back into diffuse, manageable currents. "It's working," Caelan said, astonished. "We're unclenching it." The Veilbinder thrashed, lashing at them. Tendrils of black shot out, wrapping around Caelan's arms, his throat. He choked, dropping to one knee, eyes bulging. Ilyra lunged, grabbing his shoulders. "Let him go," she snarled. "He serves me," it hissed. "His guilt is my feast. You would starve me of my finest dish?" Light around the basin flickered. For every line they rewrote, another threatened to snap. The new channels strained under the pressure of centuries. "We can't hold this," Ilyra gasped. "It's too deeply rooted." "We don't have to hold it forever," Caelan said, his voice rasping through the constriction. "We just have to break it enough that others can finish." His hands clawed at the tendrils. They sank deeper, merging with his skin, wires of shadow threading into his veins. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Giving it what it wants," he said. His eyes met hers, clear, painful. "No," she whispered, understanding slamming into her. "Don't you dare." "If it gorges on me alone," he said, trembling, "it will loosen its grip on everything else. Your people, the sleepers. It will take time to digest, time you can use, time your world can use." "Caelan!" "I am tired, Ilyra," he said. "So tired. But if my end can buy you a future where children are not trapped in endless falling, then perhaps my life will finally balance the scales I broke. You are not a debt, she choked. You said it yourself. I lied, he said gently. I am Somnoran. We measure everything. Shadow surged higher, wrapping his chest. She clung to him, nails digging into his coat. I won't let you. You don't get to choose for me, remember? You said we were partners. And partners sometimes make sacrifices the other will never forgive, he said, tears streaking his face.
I would rather your anger than your grave. He tore one hand free long enough to press it against her forehead. Go, he whispered. Power rushed through his palm, through the bond, hurling her backward. Live, fight, remember me when you walk through fields that do not rot. The core room warped. The basin, the walls, Caelan's struggling form, all stretched, twisted, pulled away. She screamed his name, reaching for him, but the bond itself bent under the force of his push. Something snapped. For a moment, a horrible, stretched moment, she felt nothing. No garden heartbeat, no anchor tree, no presence at the edge of her thoughts. Then, faintly, like a candle guttering in a hurricane, she sensed him. Far away, buried. The Veilbinder howled, triumphant and wounded at once. Its essence poured into the basin, drowning itself in its own gluttony. The world went white. She woke on earth, choking. Hands held her down, not restraining, but anchoring. She blinked against starlight and torchlight, coughing, lungs seizing. The coronet slid from her chest into the grass. Easy, Theron's voice rumbled, rough with something she'd never heard from him before, fear. You're back. You're here. Breathe, princess. She gulped air. The garden's glow pulsed around her, unsteady but present. Some petals had gone dark, others shone fiercely, as if compensating. Marquand hovered at her other side, white as parchment. What happened? He demanded. The wards screamed, then quieted. You stopped moving. For a moment, I thought. She tried to sit. The world tilted, then steadied. Every muscle ached. Caelan, she croaked. Silence fell around the name. Even the guards who didn't know its meaning seemed to recognize its weight. What did he do? Marquand asked, voice hoarse. He fed himself to it, she said, the words tasting like ash. He drew it into himself, to spare the rest. Idiot, Theron muttered, an odd break in his voice. Noble, self-sacrificing idiot. Did it work? Lumeris's voice came from the edge of the ward ring. Ilyra turned her head. The queen stood there, crownless for once, hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes held no tears, only a terrible focus. I don't know, Ilyra whispered. The pattern shifted. We cut channels. The core altered, but it's not gone. It's quieter, for now. The sleepers? Lumeris asked. A flutter of awareness brushed Ilyra's mind, light, tentative. She reached outward, following it. The boy in the orchard stirred, dreams loosening. The old woman's mind rose toward waking. Not all at once, not cleanly, but the endless falling had slowed. There, rising, she said, the word cracking. Slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Your songs, your stories, held them long enough. The healer would be pleased, she thought wildly. Then she remembered Caelan's last look, and the world tilted again. I lost him, she whispered. The garden rustled, petals shivering. A faint, distant echo responded at the edge of her consciousness, so faint she almost missed it. Not lost, the echo seemed to say, buried. Where? She breathed, eyes closing. She saw, faintly, a vision. The central blossom, its petals half closed now, guarding more fiercely than before. Beneath it, deeper than roots, a knot of shadow and light twisted, a prison and a shield. He's under it, she said,
At the very base, he pulled the Veilbinder into himself and sank. "Can you reach him?" Marquand whispered. "Not yet," she said. "The bond is muffled. He pushed me out so hard he closed the door behind me." "So that's it?" Theron demanded, anger flaring to mask pain. "He locks himself in a nightmare, you nearly die, and we call that victory?" "No," Ilyra said. They looked at her. "No," she repeated, sitting up straighter despite the protesting of her muscles. "It's not finished. He bought us time. He broke the pattern's spine, but he is still in there, wrestling it alone. I will not leave him to that." "Ilyra," Marquand began, alarmed, "you can't go back in like this. Your mind is tired," she said, "not broken. I will rest, I will eat, and then I will find another way to the core, one that doesn't let him lock me out." "That sounds like revenge," Theron muttered. "It's rescue," she snapped. "We are partners. He does not get to decide that his life is an acceptable price for ours, not alone." Lumeris stepped into the ward ring, kneeling beside her daughter. Dust smudged the queen's hem. In that moment, she looked less like an emblem and more like a mother who had watched her child almost vanish. "Your stubbornness," she said quietly, "is both our doom and our grace." "I'm listening for which way you lean," Ilyra whispered. Lumeris cupped her face, thumb brushing away a smear of soil. "I lean toward letting you finish what you started," she said, "if you can do it without tearing yourself apart in the process." "I don't know if I can," Ilyra admitted. "Then you will try," Lumeris said. "And if you falter, you will tell us. We will not let you become another sleeping statue in this garden." Ilyra nodded, tears burning at last. "I heard him call me partner," she said, "and then he forced me away." "Perhaps he has some learning to do as well," Lumeris said dryly. "When you retrieve him, you can explain partnership to him again, louder." Despite everything, a watery laugh escaped. The stars wheeled overhead. The garden hummed, wounded and healing. Somewhere at its deepest root, a prince who had chosen to drown in darkness to give them a chance grappled with an emptiness that had learned too much.
Ilyra picked up the fallen coronet and held it against her heart. "Rest," Marquand urged softly. "We'll watch, we'll ward. The world can wait a few hours for its heroine." "I'm not a heroine," she murmured, lying back down. "No," Theron said. "You're worse. You're real. That's more terrifying." She let her eyes close, not into dream this time, but into a heavy, dreamless sleep born of exhaustion. Even there, at the edge of true oblivion, she felt a faint thread, thin as spider silk, vibrating with distant struggle. "Hold on," she thought, with the last of her waking will. "I am coming back." In the depths of the garden, something answered, not in words, but in a stubborn, familiar pulse. Act 4 closed, not with triumph, but with a promise suspended, a bond stretched to its limits, a sacrifice half complete, and a princess waking to the knowledge that the final descent would demand more than courage. It would demand that she trust in everything they had built, shared dreams, altered patterns, the quiet, fierce affection between them, to walk into the core one last time and bring both a prince and a world back from the brink. The sound of wind in the cypress trees woke her before the light did. For a few disoriented breaths, Ilyra thought she was still in the core, stone under her knees, black tendrils coiling around Caelan's throat, Marquand's spiral blazing. Then the rough weave of the blanket under her hands, the chill of pre-dawn air on her face, and the ache in her limbs told her otherwise. She lay under the central blossom. Someone had moved her pallet during the night. The great flower's stem rose beside her, pale and solid, petals half closed above, like cupped hands shielding something precious. Faint light pulsed along its veins, slow and steady. "You're awake," Marcon's sleep-rough voice said from somewhere near her feet. "Thank every half-bored minor spirit." She turned her head. He sat slumped against a root, cloak wrapped around his shoulders, ink stains on his fingers even here. Dark crescents shadowed his eyes, but relief loosened his posture. "How long was I?" "A day and a night," he said. "You slept like someone who'd been wrung out," which, based on the screaming and the wards doing their falcon impression, is probably accurate. "How are the sleepers?" she asked, forcing herself upright. Waking came a deeper voice. Captain Theron approached from the camp's edge, helm under his arm. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen. Lines etched deeper, hair at his temples more silver than she remembered. But his eyes were clear. Slowly, he added, the boy from the orchard opened his eyes at dawn, started yelling about falling, then asked for bread. The others are stirring.
No one else dropped while you were wherever you were. Hope flared, tempered by the hollow ache where Caelan's presence usually hovered. "And the fields?" she asked. "The blight hasn't gone," Theron said, "but it's stopped creeping, mostly. In some places it's even pulling back. The healers swear they can feel something loosening in the air, like pressure easing." Marconde nodded briskly. "I've had reports from 3 regions. Dreams are changing again. Less endless falling, more odd, fragmented fears people can actually remember. Ordinary nightmares, not the smothering kind." His eyes flicked to her hands. "That's you two. Whatever you did, you jarred the pattern." "We did," she echoed, hand moving unconsciously toward the central blossom, but at a cost. Her fingers brushed petal. It was cool and firm, vibrating with a faint hum. Caelan, she thought. Silence met her. Not emptiness, a muffled sense of effort, as if someone were shouting from behind many doors. "He's still in there," she whispered, deep, wrestling it. Marconde didn't ask how she knew. "Can you reach him?" he asked instead. "Not like before," she said. "The bond is closed on his side. He shoved me out hard enough to lock the door." "So that's his grand plan?" Theron said tightly. "He drowns himself in that thing and expects you to sit on the shore and applaud?" "He expects me to live," Ilyra said. "He thinks that's enough." "And you don't?" Marconde murmured. She shook her head. "He called me partner, then made a choice alone. I won't let that be the final word." Theron raked a hand through his hair. "You cannot go back down there as you are. The first time nearly ripped you in half. The second might do it properly." "I know," she said, surprising herself with how steady she sounded. "We can't just repeat what failed. We have to change the rules." "By all means," Marconde said faintly. "Rewrite centuries of Somnoric theory twice in a week." "My notes are already incomprehensible." She managed a weak smile. "You said it yourself. No one's done this before. That means there's no one to tell us we can't." He sighed. "I hate that you've started using my own optimism against me. Welcome to partnership." A rustle drew their attention. Queen Lumeris stepped into the circle of roots, cloak trailing dew. Her hair was braided and pinned again. The private looseness of the night's vigil had been set aside, but the strain of sleepless hours showed in the pale smudges beneath her eyes. "You look marginally less like a ghost," she observed, taking in Ilya's pallor. "That's something." "I'm alive," Ilyra said. "Apparently that counts for quite a lot today." "It does," Lumeris said quietly.
"I have no desire to test the line between mostly dead and entirely so." She approached the central blossom, laying a hand beside Ilyra's. Her fingers did not sink. The petal held firm. "I can't feel him," she said. "Not as you do. But there's a knot in the magic. A place where something is holding much more than it should." "He took the Veilbinder into himself," Ilyra said. "Pulled as much of it as he could away from the core and sank." Lumeris's jaw tightened. "And left you outside." "Yes," Ilyra said. "And no. The pattern is changed. The sleepers are waking. He gave us a window. Lumerus studied her daughter's face. And you mean to use it, to pull him back, Ilyra said simply. Not by dragging him alone, but by changing what he's holding. You can't kill it outright, Marquand said. From what you described, it's too woven into the fabric of how fear moves now. We sever its unnatural teeth, it grows new ones somewhere else. It's like weeds, or bureaucracy. So, we stop trying to starve it, Ilyra said slowly, and feed it differently. Farron made a face. You sound like him, he said. Scholar words. Say more, Lumerus said, ignoring him. Ilyra stared at the petal, at the faint, distant pulse beneath it. Memories clicked into place. Somnora's reservoir of nightmares, their attempt to bottle fear, the Veilbinder's gloating that it was their masterpiece, her own people's struggles with dreams, how teaching them to shape their thoughts had shifted the blight. Somnora's mistake was trying to take fear away, she said, collecting it, hiding it, refusing to sit with it. It turned into a monster because no one looked at it with anything but dread and guilt. We've been making a similar mistake, in smaller ways. Teaching people to blow away shadows, yes, but not always to ask what those shadows mean. Marquand frowned. I thought that was the point. Redirect the nightmares. Give people tools to resist. It was the first step, Ilyra said. Necessary. Now we need the second. We can't just push fear aside. We have to compost it. Compost, Theron repeated blankly. Turn it into something that feeds us, instead of letting it rot under the floorboards, she said. Fear tells us what we care about, who we might lose, where we might harm. If the Veilbinder is made of centuries of unspoken fears, maybe the way to disarm it is to flood it with acknowledged ones. Not just mine, everyone's. Marquand's eyes widened slowly. A collective witnessing, he said. If enough minds face what they fear, name it, own it, refuse to be ruled by it, then the entity has nothing to twist. It would be bound again, but this time as a servant, not a tyrant. Exactly, she said. We don't ask Caelan to hold it alone. We ask everyone to hold a piece.
Together. Theron stared at her as if she'd suggested arming farmers with spoons. You want to tell people to look at their nightmares and invite them in for tea? In essence, Ilyra said. They'll think you've gone mad, he said. They already think that, a little, she said. And some will refuse, but some won't. We've already seen it. The farmer in Halvan, the children with their tree houses and riverbanks, when they faced their shadows, the blight eased. You would need more than a handful of stories, Marquand said, mind clearly racing. A realm-wide ritual. A night when we ask everyone who can to sleep at the same time, focused on the same intention. Anchored by you and, if we can reach him, Caelan. And by you, Ilyra said, looking at him. By my mother. By Theron. By anyone willing to stand in that anchor circle and say, I am afraid, and that does not make me weak. Lumerus's brows lifted slightly. You're asking your realm to be vulnerable on purpose. Yes, Ilyra said. We ask them to fight in their sleep. Perhaps we can now ask them to heal there. Silence settled, filled with the weight of what she was proposing. It will be messy, Marquand said quietly. Some will fail. Some will be hurt. But I think you're right. If we want to end the age of lone guardians, we have to build something communal. Somnora had dreamweavers, Ilyra said. We can have dream watchers. Not a secret priesthood, a practice. Theron grunted. And how exactly do you get an entire realm to sleep on command? Lumerus's mouth curved in something like a tired smile. By making it a royal decree, she said, and by offering food, songs, and a night off from work. He blinked. You're serious.
As a failed Somnoran cistern, she said dryly, people will do difficult things if they feel they are doing them together. We've seen it 100 times, in harvests, in wars, in mourning. Sleep can be the same. Her gaze shifted to Ilyra. You'll need a place to anchor such a ritual. This garden, perhaps. It seems fond of you. The anchor tree circle, Ilyra said, where the verdant leaves and Somnoran needles grow together. It's ours. Lumerus nodded once, decision settling over her like armor. Then we plan, she said, immediately, before the window your prince bought us closes. Ilyra's chest tightened at the word your, but she didn't correct it. Not yet. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Messengers rode out from the palace to every village, town, and outpost. The decree was simple. On the night of the next new moon, all who were able were asked to lay down their work early, gather with their families or neighbors, and sleep. Not drunkenly, not haphazardly, but with intention.
Priests and herbalists spread a new kind of prayer, words to be spoken before bed, not begging for nightmares to be taken away, but naming fears aloud. I am afraid of losing my children, one line began. I am afraid my fields will never bloom again, another said. I am afraid of failing those who look to me, read a third. Each ended the same way. I will feel this and still wake. In the palace, Ilyra watched scribes copy the prayers, her fingers tracing the lines unconsciously. It felt wrong at first to ask people to lean toward what hurt, but when she imagined Caelan alone in the garden's depths, devoured by a thing made of unspoken terror, the wrongness flipped. He had gone down alone because no one else had known how to help. Now they would. Some will scoff, Marcon said, sorting stacks of parchments. Some will sleep through it without a thought. But enough. He shook his head, wonder creeping into his voice. If even a fraction truly participates, the somnoric force of that many aligned minds. Theron grunted. Let's hope it doesn't break your precious cisterns all over again. That's the point, Marcon said. We're not building a cistern this time. We're building irrigation. On the second night, Ilyra dreamed without trying. She stood at the anchor tree circle alone. The verdant leaves were wilted. The Somnoran needles hung limp. The air tasted stale, as if nothing had moved through it in years. At the base of the tree, where the spiral stair had opened, the earth was sealed. She knelt, pressing her hand to the ground. Caelan, she thought. The silence that answered was not the numb nothing from before. It was tight, strained, a held breath. I know what you did, she whispered into the soil. I know why. I still think it was wrong. Faintly, like a voice heard through layers of cloth, she felt his protest. Better me than... Then what? She said sharply. Then my people? Then the world? That is not your choice alone. You said you trusted me. Trust goes both ways. The earth shivered. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to the dirt. We're changing the pattern, she said. All of us. Not just you, not just me. You are not a wall anymore, Caelan. You are a door. Let us through. For a moment there was nothing. Then the soil under her hands warmed, as if someone on the other side had pressed back. The night of the new moon fell clear and cold. From the garden, Ilyra could see torches flickering in the distant hills, clusters of light where villages gathered. The air hummed faintly, full of the held breath of thousands settling down at once. The central blossom loomed, petals barely parted. No one had touched Caelan's body. It still lay cradled within, unchanged. Within the outer ring, a smaller circle had been marked with chalk and charms, the anchor point. Ilyra stood at its center, crown piece balanced on her hair, fingers brushing the etched lines. On either side of her, her mother and Marcand took their places, palms facing inward. Theron stood just outside the circle, swordsman's instincts refusing to be dampened by ritual. "Last chance to call this off," he said gruffly. "No,"
Ilyra said. He grunted. Good. Would have been disappointed if you agreed. Lumeris glanced at her daughter, then out at the hills. We ask a great deal, she murmured. Sleep as courage, fear as offering. This is a different kind of battle. Maybe the right kind, Ilyra said. Marquand fidgeted with the talisman at his belt. If this works, we will have to redefine half the somnolence parchments in the archives. If this doesn't work, Theron said, we'll be too busy fighting shadow teeth to care about parchments. Comforting, Marquand muttered. Ilyra knelt, placing her hands on the ground where the anchor tree rooted in the dream. Her fingers traced the spiral carved there, the verdant and somnoran sigils interwoven. Ready? She asked. As I'll ever be, Marquand said. I am queen of a realm that talks to leaves and nightmares, Lumeris said dryly. I suspect I was never meant for ordinary readiness. Ilyra smiled faintly. Then we begin. She closed her eyes and let herself fall. She stood in the anchor circle. This time, when she looked up, the tree's branches were full, leaves and needles shimmering with the light of countless small flames. Each flicker felt like a mind, a dreamer somewhere in the realm whispering their fear and choosing to sleep anyway. Lumeris and Marquand appeared beside her, their features softened by dreamlight. Marquand peered around in wide-eyed fascination. Lumeris's expression was composed, but her hands flexed as if reaching for a sword she did not carry. Extraordinary, Marquand breathed. This much somnoric alignment. Later, Lumeris said. Threads of light descended from the branches, brushing Ilyra's shoulders, then sinking in. They didn't feel like burdens. They felt like stories. A mother terrified of childbirth after losing her first. A young man afraid he would never be more than his father's shadow. An old woman fearing her memories would fade before she could pass them on. Each thread carried a whispered truth, and beneath it, a stubborn little pulse of something else. Refusal. I can feel them, Ilyra whispered. All the things they're afraid of. All the ways they want to live anyway. That's what we feed it, Caelan's voice said. He stood at the tree's far side. She almost sobbed at the sight. He looked worn thin, as if long years had been packed into the days since she'd last seen him.
Shadow veining traced his arms, his throat, his temples, ink stains too deep to wash. But his eyes were clear. The crushing emptiness she'd felt in the core was still there, coiled behind them, but it had not devoured him. You opened the door, she whispered. Hard not to, he said, voice rough with unshed laughter and something more fragile. You kept knocking. He glanced at Lumeris and Marquand, nodding in acknowledgement. Lumeris inclined her head, queen to prince. Marquand stared like a scholar at a miracle, and then, to his credit, bowed. You realize this is terribly irresponsible, Caelan said to Ilyra and the circle as a whole. Shadow flickered along his jaw when he smiled. Inviting an entire realm into my mistakes. They're inviting themselves, Ilyra said. We only pointed the way. He exhaled, almost a laugh. Very well, partner, he murmured. Let's finish what we broke. The ground trembled. The path to the core opened not as a stair this time, but as a widening of the circle itself. The earth thinned, showing layers beneath. The reservoir, the basin, the twisted pattern. The Veilbinder's presence oozed upward, less a tidal wave now and more a dense, crawling fog. It tasted the gathered fear, the threads running through the anchor tree. Thick whispers rose. So much, it purred, so rich. You bring me a banquet. No, Ilyra said, we bring you work. She reached for Caelan's hand. He took it, his grip firm despite the tremor she felt in him. Together they pressed their joined palms to the tree trunk. Send it down, Caelan said. Lumeris and Marquand laid their hands on the bark as well. Light flared, carrying with it the countless small threads.
They flowed from the branches into the trunk, then down into the roots, like rainwater into thirsty soil. The Veilbinder recoiled. This was not the fear it preferred, half-formed, denied, ripe for twisting. These threads came with names attached, with context. They were tangled with love, duty, stubbornness. They did not gush mindlessly into its maw. They moved with intention, like people walking into a city they owned. "What is this?" it snarled. "What dares?" "We do," Lumerus said, voice carrying the weight of all her years. "You have fed on us in secret long enough. If you must exist, you will earn your place." "You wanted to eat our nightmares," Marcon said, eyes blazing behind his spectacles. "Fine, digest them properly. Turn them into lessons, not chains." "You will not choose who sleeps and who wakes," Ilyra said. "We will." "You will not isolate me from them," Caelan added, shadow lines on his skin flaring with light from within. "I am their ally." The fog roiled, lashing. "Foolish," it hissed. "Fear is chaos. I am order. Without me, your minds would drown." "We drowned ourselves long before you," Caelan said. "We gave you a shape because we were afraid to feel. That was our error. This is our correction." The threads sank into the fog. Where they touched, the Veilbinder's substance shivered, its edges fraying. Faces bloomed briefly in its mass, farmers, children, elders, looking back at it, not with terror, but with wary curiosity. It surged, trying to twist them, but each thread carried its own anchor, a hand held, a song sung, a promise made. It could not move them as easily as it had moved secret, solitary dread. "You are still emptiness," Ilyra said softly. "You always will be, but you don't get to decide what fills you anymore." Caelan's grip tightened. "We do," he said. They pulled. Not to rip the Veilbinder out, but to stretch it, to spread its mass thin across the countless small channels they'd opened. The core basin cracked under the redistribution. Dark substance flowed outward like ink on water, seeping into every corridor of Somnoric space. Fear would always exist, but now it had paths, not pits. The entity screamed, a long, unraveling sound. It felt its own boundaries dissolve, the tight knot of self loosening. It reached for Caelan, for Ilyra, for the anchor tree. This time they didn't push it away. They let it flow through. It tore at them, trying to hook into old wounds. Caelan's guilt, Ilyra's fear of failing, Lumerus's buried grief, Marcan's terror that his mind would shatter and leave him useless. Each time it found a hold, they named it. "I am afraid my daughter will die before me," Lumerus said, tears edging her voice. "I am afraid I have caused more harm than good," Marcan whispered. "I am afraid the world will go on without needing me," Caelan said. "I am afraid I will never know who I am apart from duty," Ilyra said. The words settled like stones in a river. The current changed around them. The Veilbinder howled, its teeth blunted wherever it struck truth. It had nothing left to sharpen itself on. It tried to condense again, to pull itself back into a singular, devouring whole. The pattern they'd woven would not allow it. Rain cannot become a cistern without walls. Slowly, reluctantly, the entity thinned, its presence dissolving in the vastness of the shared dreamscape. No longer a single mouth, but 1,000 small reminders built into the weave. Fear rising, being seen, and being let go. The basin cracked. Light poured from the fractures, flooding upward. It washed over Caelan and Ilyra, through them, into the branches, and out along the threads. For a moment she saw everything.
Villages where people stirred, sweating from vivid dreams, but waking to find their hearts beating and their loved ones near. Fields where gray peeled back to reveal stubborn green beneath. The orchard boy sitting up, crying and laughing at once.
An old Somnoran woman in some remembered past, watching her grandchildren dream and wishing they didn't have to carry the weight she'd known. Then the light narrowed, focusing. The anchor tree shuddered. The earth at its base heaved, splitting. Caelan staggered, dropping to one knee. "Go," he rasped. "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "Up," he insisted, "back." "I won't leave you." "We're not leaving," he said, meeting her eyes. "We're rising." The ground dropped away. For a heartbeat she felt nothing under her feet. Then the familiar texture of the garden soil met her back, cool and damp. The scent of real air, crisp night, crushed leaves, human breath rushed in. She opened her eyes. She lay under the central blossom, staring up at petals blazing with internal light. The coronet dug into her scalp, slightly askew. Nearby, someone swore softly. "Princess?" Theron's voice. "Don't move. Or do. Just say something that sounds like you." "I have never sounded like anyone else," she croaked. Marquand made a strangled noise that might have been a laugh or a sob. Lumeris's hand closed around Ilyra's, grounding her. The central blossom quivered. Its petals unfurled. Light poured out, soft and steady. Vines slackened, loosening their hold on the figure cradled within. For a terrifying moment, he did not move. Then Caelan's chest rose. He drew a breath that sounded like no breath he'd taken in centuries, ragged, surprised, full. His lashes fluttered. Dark eyes opened, focusing slowly. He stared up at the night sky. For the first time, he saw it without Petals in the way. "What?" he said hoarsely. "Is that many stars?" "Real ones," Ilyra said, tears spilling now. His head turned toward her. Confusion, disbelief, and a slowly dawning awe chased each other across his face. "Ilyra," he whispered. She laughed through her tears. Yes, still Ilyra, still loud. He shifted, trying to sit up. The vines, sensing his intent, unwound fully, retreating into the stem like courteous serpents. His muscles trembled with atrophy and unused weight. Theron swore again, stepping forward instinctively. "We've got you," he grunted, sliding an arm under Caelan's shoulders. "Easy, your somnoricness." Marquand hovered, hands fluttering toward Caelan's face, then withdrawing, unsure where it was appropriate to touch a legend. Lumeris watched, her expression a careful blend of caution and recognition. She inclined her head when Caelan's gaze snagged on her. "Welcome to my garden," she said, "and my problem." He smiled, weary and astonished. "Your Majesty," he managed, "I apologize for the state of your nightmares." "You'd better," she said. "You've made quite a mess." "The worst of it is mopped up," he said. With assistance. His eyes sought Ilyra's again. The world seemed to hush around that look. The guards, the queen, Marquand, all faded to the edges of her perception. There was only Caelan, half sitting in the cradle of his former prison, human and fragile, and blazing with so much life it hurt to see. "You came back," he said simply. "You left a terrible note," she replied. "I had to." His mouth quirked. "I meant to die quietly." "I know," she said. "That's why I was very loud." He laughed, the sound raw and delighted. Tears shone at the corners of his eyes now, too. "We did it," he said, almost disbelieving. "It's quieter. The Veilbinder is a hum, not a wound." "It's everyone's hum now," she said. "Not yours alone." Threads of resonance still buzzed at the edge of her awareness, the collective fear and courage of her realm. But they no longer pressed, no longer suffocated. They flowed. I will need to write so many addendums, Marquand murmured, dazed. Entire new sections on communal somnoric regulation. I don't have enough ink. You'll manage, Lumeris said, not taking her eyes off her daughter. We all will. She reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from Ilyra's face. You look older, she observed, and very tired. I feel 200 years old, Ilyra said. How do you do this ruling thing? By never going into cursed cisterns, if I can help it, Lumeris replied. Her thumb lingered at Ilyra's temple. You brought him back. We did, Ilyra said, glancing at Caelan. All of us. Theron sniffed. I mostly stood guard and swore at shadows, he said. But I did it very well. You did, Ilyra said. Thank you. He cleared his throat, looking away. Don't mention it. The garden rustled softly around them, petals opening wider to the night. Some of the gray edges had faded already. Others remained, scars that would take time to heal. That felt right. Caelan eased fully upright with Theron's help, then swung his legs over the side of the blossom, boots touching earth for the first time since long before verdant was verdant. He wobbled. Ilyra reached out. Their hands met. Warm, solid, not dream-warm, not woven from thought, but real. He stared at their joined fingers as if afraid they would vanish. Then he threaded his hand through hers, holding on. This feels different, he said softly. Less poetic? She asked. More terrifying, he said, and much better. The ache that had lodged under his ribs since his sacrifice loosened. She squeezed back, feeling his pulse thrum against her skin. Behind them, Marquand cleared his throat loudly. I should probably check the wards, he said to no one in particular. Make sure the garden doesn't decide to sprout legs and walk away in its excitement. Go, Lumeris said, amused, before you combust from observation. He fled with something like dignity, taking a cluster of guards with him. Theron lingered long enough to roll his eyes affectionately at Ilyra, then drifted off under the pretense of assessing perimeter integrity. Lumeris stayed. Somnoran prince, she said, stepping closer, we will have to speak of treaties, of what your presence means, now that you are not just a story in a flower. Yes, Caelan said, we will. You will also need to eat, sleep like a person, and learn not to frighten my staff by appearing in their dreams uninvited, she added. He smiled. I will do my best. I suspect your best is inconveniently impressive, she replied. We'll adjust. Her gaze moved between him and Ilyra, something complex there. Acceptance, caution, reluctant hope. If you hurt her, she said quietly, I will personally petition the nearest surviving Somnoran cistern to take you back. Mother, Ilyra groaned. I would deserve it, Caelan said solemnly, but I have no intention of testing your mercy. Good, Lumeris said. Then I will leave you to sit and negotiate your next reckless venture. She squeezed Ilyra's shoulder once, then turned away, cloak trailing petals. Later, when the garden settled into a new rhythm and the sky paled at the edges, Ilyra and Caelan sat with their backs against the central stem, hands still loosely entwined. The anchor bond hummed between them, but softer now, less like a rope holding two people on opposite sides of a chasm, more like a bridge they could choose to cross. How does it feel, she asked quietly, being awake? He tilted his head back, eyes closing as he breathed in the sense of earth and dawn. Strange, he said, loud. There are textures I'd forgotten. The way air tastes different at morning than at night. The ache in my legs. The weight of my own body. He opened his eyes, turning his head to look at her. You? Taller, she said. He blinked, then laughed. Taller? On the inside, she clarified. As if the space I take up changed. I don't fit in the storeroom anymore, or in the idea of myself I had before this. That seems inconveniently healthy, he said. It might wear off, she warned. I doubt it, he said. They fell quiet. The garden's petals whispered. Somewhere beyond the hills, a rooster crowed. "Do you regret it?" she asked at last. "Any of it?" His smile faded into something more thoughtful. "Regret is a constant for me," he said. "I regret my part in creating the Veilbinder. I regret the years I spent believing the only way to atone was to bleed alone. I regret how quickly I tried to throw myself away when given a chance to do it meaningfully. And this?" she pressed. He looked at their hands, at the garden, at the faint glow still hanging in the air from a realm's worth of shared sleep. "This," he said slowly, "I do not regret, not even a little." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Good, because I would be very cross if I dragged you back from a noble self-sacrifice you wished had stuck." "Dragged?" he repeated. "You make it sound ungraceful." "You were very heavy," she said. "Emotionally, at least." He laughed, full and bright. "Fair." She turned her head fully, meeting his gaze. The anchor bond hummed in time with her heartbeat. "I meant what I said," she murmured, "about liking you. That hasn't diminished. Mine has worsened," he said gravely. Her stomach dipped. "Worsened?" "It's grown worse," he clarified. "Stronger, louder, infuriatingly persistent." She swatted his shoulder with her free hand. "Do not play with words right now." "I am Somnoran," he said. "We only have words to play with." He sobered. "Ilyra, I like you very much. More than is convenient for a newly awake man with centuries of social rust and a poor track record with entities of absence. I don't know what that looks like yet. Here, in your world." "Neither do I," she said honestly. "I have never done this, whatever this is. I suspect there will be missteps, and ministers, and at least one scandalized ballad. And your mother," he added. "She will pretend disapproval," Ilyra said, "and then she will quietly make sure you have a room near the library." He smiled, eyes warm. "Then I would like to try," he said, "to learn what this looks like, awake, with you." The warmth blossomed fully now, suffusing her chest. Terror threaded through it, but the good kind, the kind that meant something mattered. "I would like that too," she said softly. He hesitated. "May I?" He didn't complete the question. He didn't need to. The bond carried enough of its shape. She felt her face heat, but she nodded. "Yes," she said, gently. "I am still made of spun glass." "So am I," he said. "We'll rattle carefully." He leaned in. The kiss was not dramatic. There were no flaring petals, no chorus, just the warm press of his mouth, tentative and amazed, against hers. The anchor bond thrummed, not in a blaze of magic, but in a simple, steady pulse. Home, it seemed to say. When they drew back, foreheads resting together, the garden sighed around them, as if settling into a long-awaited shape. "Well," Caelan said softly, "I can confirm. Awake is better." "You're very biased," she murmured. "In your favor?" he asked. "In favor of being alive," she said. "And yes, maybe also in mine." He smiled against her skin. "Good." They sat like that until the sun edged over the horizon, turning the garden's luminescence pale in comparison. Birds began to stir in the twisted trees. Somewhere, Marcan's distant shouting about calibration of post-Veilbind dream metrics drifted faintly. Life, in all its inconvenient, noisy glory, resumed. In the weeks that followed, the verdant court adjusted. The blight receded slowly, leaving behind patches of scarred soil that would take years to fully heal. People kept dreaming. Their fears didn't vanish. They shifted, became less suffocating, more instructive. Children began telling stories of a shadow eater that now lived under everyone's beds, but minded its manners if you talked to it. The realm's first dream watch circles formed, small groups who met once a month to share the fears they could name and the dreams they remembered, laughing and crying and learning that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a kind of strength. Marquand wrote a treatise so long that even he complained about editing it. Lumeris instituted new practices in the court, a day each season where everyone, from queen to gardener, was encouraged to rest without agenda, to let their minds wander and return, the opposite of the old Somnoran urge to control every thought. And Caelan learned to walk the palace corridors without flinching at every shadow. He spent hours in the library, catching up on centuries he'd missed, laughing with Ilyra over the embellishments later historians had added to Somnora's story. He walked the fields with farmers who no longer shook when they spoke of sleep. He attended council sessions, offering insights on how magical infrastructure and ordinary lives intertwined. He also learned that eating too much honeycake at one sitting was unwise, that palace dogs would accept him only after he'd been smelled thoroughly, and that Theron's gruff disdain hid a fierce affection that extended, begrudgingly, to him. One evening, months after the garden night, Ilyra found him standing on the same balcony where she'd watched the roses crumble. The terraces below were green again, not perfectly, some beds still bore gray scars, but vibrantly, stubbornly alive. "Your city had more towers," she said. "Less cypress," he replied, "more canals, fewer hounds." "And more arrogance," she teased gently. "Much more," he agreed. They watched as a gardener below bent to inspect a rosebush. Its petals were a little duller than before the blight, but they held. "You miss it," she said. "Somnora?" he asked. "Every day." He smiled faintly. "But I no longer wish to rewind to it. I want to carry it, here, without letting it swallow what is." "Good," she said.
I would be very offended if you spent all your time longing for a place I can't compete with. You don't compete, he said, turning to her. You coexist. In my mind, somehow. That's terribly inefficient, she said. You should file your affections better. I've tried, he said. They refuse to be catalogued. She leaned on the rail, shoulder brushing his. We're building something new, she said quietly. Not Somnora, not old Verdant. A place where people can sleep without being devoured. Where guardians are many, not alone. Where fear is inconvenient, but not a tyrant. And where princesses kiss princes awake instead of the other way around, he added. Don't get used to it, she said. I'm not in the habit of rescuing men from their own bad decisions. He laughed. I'll endeavor to make fewer of those. They fell into comfortable silence, listening to the fountain, the distant murmur of palace life, the soft, ever-present hum at the edge of their thoughts, the retuned presence of what had once been the Veilbinder. It no longer felt like a predator, more like a weather pattern, noticed, respected, navigated. Do you ever still hear it, she asked, as it was? Sometimes, he said, in the spaces between breaths, when someone tries very hard not to feel something. His fingers brushed hers. But then I remember that I am not the only one listening, that there are farmers, scholars, queens, children, all holding a piece of the net. And me, she said. Especially you, he replied. She let her hand curl fully into his. Partner, she said. He turned his head, bumping his temple lightly against hers. Partner. His story would not end here. No story worth living ever did. There would be new threats, new mistakes, new nights of restless sleep. There would be arguments and compromises, jealousy from ministers, confusion from neighboring realms who didn't understand why verdant courtiers occasionally declared, "I am afraid," at the start of meetings. But there would also be laughter, fields in bloom, children who grew up knowing that their nightmares could be talked about, not buried. A prince who had once bound himself to a flower, learning to dance badly at festivals. A princess who had once hidden in a storeroom, finding, at last, that there were rooms of any size in which she could be wholly herself. And somewhere, always, a garden that listened when people slept, not to devour what they feared, but to help them carry it. Ilyra breathed in the mingled scents of roses and stone and the faint, lingering trace of dream. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new work, new counsels, new lessons at the Dreamwatch circles. Somewhere in the realm, someone would whisper a fear aloud for the first time.
Tonight, she stood on a balcony with Caelan's hand in hers and let herself simply be. Alive, awake, feathered not to a single destiny, but to a web of choices made with eyes open. The sleeping prince was no longer sleeping. Neither was she.